Okay, I'm going to narrate for you a story called The Black Spider, and it's by a guy named Jeremias Gotthelf. It is Gotthelf. This is from 1842. It's considered like one of the best Swiss Gothics, or like a early, very popular. And this story really had an influence on Swiss Gothic literature. And basically, like before Lovecraft, this, The Willows by Algernon Blackwood, and like The Great God Pen by Macon were kind of like the foundations, and then people like Tolkien and Lovecraft were influenced by these people. So it is. I'm translating it with Google Translate, and we'll just. I guess let's just dive in and do it. Above the mountains, the sun rose, shifting in clear majesty into a friendly but narrow valley, awakening to joyful life those creatures created to rejoice in the sun of their lives. From the gilded forest's edge, the blackbird trilled its morning song among sparkling flowers and pearly grass. The yearning quail's resounding love song echoed. Over the dark fir trees, rutting crows danced their nuptial round of croaked tender lullabies over the thorny beds of their featherless young. In the middle of the sun-drenched slope, nature had carved out a fertile, shaded area of soil. In the center stood a stately and bright house, surrounded by a magnificent orchard, in which several crabapple trees still displayed their late blossoms. Half of the lush grass, irrigated by the house well, was still standing, while half had already been churned out to pasture. Around the house lay a daily radiance, which cannot be achieved with a few strokes of the broom applied on Saturday evening between day and night, a testament to the precious heritage of ancestral cleanliness, which must be cultivated every day like family honor, for which a single unattended hour can bring stains. Bloodstains remain the same, indelible from generation to generation, defying all whitewash. It is not without reason that the earth, built by God's hand, and the house built by human hands, shone in their purest splendor. Above both, a star shone brightly in the blue sky. Today, a high holy day. It was the day in which the sun entered. It was the day in which the Son returned to the Father, as proof that the latter still stood in heaven, on which angels ascended and descended, and the souls of men, when they departed from the body and their salvation and focus, were with the Father alone and not here on earth. It was the day on earth which the entire plant world grows and blooms in full exuberance towards heaven, a symbol for man renewed every year of his destiny. A wondrous sound resounded over the hills. One could not know where the sound came from. It seemed to come from all sides. It came from the churches out in the wide valleys. From there the bells announced that the temples of God were open to all whose hearts were open to the voice of their God. Wait a minute, let me make sure. Did this skip a page? A lively life stirred around the beautiful house. Near the well, horses were groomed with particular care. Stately mothers were surrounded by playful fowls in the wide well trough. Contented-looking cows quenched their thirst, and twice the boy had to take broom and shovel because he hadn't cleaned up the traces of their contentment thoroughly enough. Heartily sturdy maids washed their rosy-cheeked faces at the well with handy rags, their hair twisted into two balls above their ears, and carried water with hurried diligence. The door opened, and in mighty bursts the dark column of smoke rose, straight and high, into the blue air from the short chimney. Wait. It seems like it almost feels like it's like skipped a page, but I guess it didn't. I guess like when I'm scrolling, I don't know, it just seemed like it doesn't flow, but whatever. According to this, I did not skip a page though. The door opened and the mighty burst, the dark column of smoke rose, straight and high into the blue air from the short chimney. Slowly and stooped, the grandfather walked around the house with a walking stick, silently watching the activity of the farm hands and maids, stroking a horse here, restraining a cow stubborn defiance there, pointing out forgotten straws to the inattentive boy, here and there with his stick, and diligently taking his lighter from the deep pocket of his long vest to relight his pipe, which he had enjoyed so much in the morning despite its labored breathing. On a freshly swept bench in front of the house, beside the door, sat the grandfather, slicing fine bread into a large towel, thin and just the right size for each bite. Not as carelessly as cooks or maids, who sometimes make pieces that would choke a whale on. Well-fed, proud hens and beautiful doves squabbled over the crumbs at their feet, and if a timid little dove missed out, the grandmother would throw it a piece, especially comforting it with kind words about the lack of understanding and the boisterousness of the others. Inside the spacious, clean kitchen, a mighty fire of fir wood crackled. Coffee beans popped in a wide pan as a sturdy woman stirred them with a wooden ladle. The coffee grinder creaked between the knees of the freshly washed maid. But under the open parlor door, still holding the open coffee sack, stood a beautiful, somewhat pale woman who said, "You midwife, don't roast my coffee so dark today, or they might think." I would like to save the powder. The godfather's wife is terribly disloyal and interprets everything to one's disadvantage. A half-pound more or less doesn't matter these days, and don't forget to have the wine warm at the right time. Wondering if part of this broke off. Grandfather would think it isn't a proper christening if the godparents didn't have a warm pot of wine before they go to church. Don't skimp on it, you hear? There in the bowl of the tiled bench is saffron and cinnamon. The sugar is here on the table. And take as much wine as you think is at least half too much. At a christening, you never have to worry that things won't go as planned. It is said that the christening is to be held in the house today, and the midwife is performing the duties of the cook just as skillfully as the midwife used to. But she must hurry if she is to be ready in time and cook everything on the simple hearth that custom demands. From the cellar came a sturdy man carrying a massive piece of cheese. He took the first best plate from the gleaming tiled bench, placed the cheese on it, and was about to carry it into the living room to the brown walnut table. But Ben's, cried the beautiful pale woman. How they would laugh if we didn't have a better plate for the christening. And she went to the shining cherrywood cupboard, called the buffer, where ornaments adorned the glass windows of the house. There she took a beautiful plate with a blue rim, a large bouquet of flowers in the center, surrounded by witty sayings, for example. "O man, think 3 batson are worth a pound of butter. God gives grace to man, but I dwell in the mud. In hell it is hot, and the potter works diligently. The cow eats the grass, but man must go to the grave." Besides the cheese, she placed the mighty zoop, the distinctive Bernays pastry, braided like a woman's braid, beautifully brown and yellow, baked from the finest flour, eggs, and butter, as big as a yearling, almost as heavy. And above and below it she placed 2 more plates. Piled high on them lay the appetizing little cakes, habuchlein on one, uriclein on the other. Hot, thick nidel stood covered in a beautiful floured pot on the stove. And in the gleaming 3-legged pot with its yellow lid, the coffee was boiling. Thus a breakfast awaited the expected godparents, such as princes rarely have, and no peasant in the world but the Bernese. Thousands of Englishmen run through Switzerland, but neither one of the 100 lords nor one of the stiff, by no mean ladies, has ever had such a breakfast. If only they would come soon, everything would be ready, sighed the midwife. It takes quite a while until everything is finished and everyone has had their business, and the priest is terribly punctual and gives harsh remands if you're not there on time. Grandfather never allows us to take the trolley either. He believes that a child who isn't carried to baptism but led instead will become lazy and never learn to properly use its legs. If only the godmother were there. She's the one who's always the last to arrive. The godparents make it shorter and can always catch up later. The fear of the godparents spread throughout the house. Aren't they here yet was heard everywhere. Faces peered out for them in every corner of the house, and the Turk barked at the top of his lungs as if he were calling them. But the grandmother said it wasn't like this in the old days. People knew that on such days you had to get up at the right time and that the Lord waited for no one. Finally, the boy rushed into the kitchen with the news his godmother was coming. She arrived covered in sweat and laden like the New Year's baby. In one hand she carried the black cords of a large, flower-strewn waiting bag, inside which, wrapped in a fine white towel, lay a large braid, a gift for the mother in childbirth. In her other hand she carried a second bag, and in it was clothing for the child, along with some items for her own use, especially beautiful white stockings. Under one arm she carried a print of the wreath and the lace cap with the magnificent black silk hair ribbons. Joyful shouts of God welcome rang out from all sides, and she scarcely had time to lay down one of her burdens to greet the outstretched hands. From all sides willing hands reached out to help her, and the young woman stood beneath the doorway. Then a new greeting began, until the midwife admonished them to go inside. They could tell each other what the custom was. And with deft manners the midwife seated the godmother behind the table, and the young woman came with the coffee despite the godmother's protests, and claims that she had already had some. The father's sister wouldn't allow her to leave the house without eating. That was very bad for young girls, she said. But she was already old, and the maids didn't like to get up on time, which was why she was so late. If it had been up to her alone, she would have been there long ago. The thick cream was poured into the coffee, and though the godmother resisted and said she didn't like it at all, the woman threw a lump of sugar into it. For a long time the godmother refused to let the braided bread be cut open because of her, but she had to have a good-sized piece put in front of her and eat it. She refused cheese for a long time, saying it didn't need it at all. She simply thinks it's only semi-skimmed, and that's why she doesn't like it, said the woman, and the godmother had to give in. But she absolutely refused the cakes. She wouldn't know where to put them, she said. She simply believed they weren't clean and was used to better things, was the final reply. What else could she do but eat cakes? During all the fuss, she had measured out the first tin of cake in small sips, and now a real argument broke out. The godmother turned the tin over, wanting no more room for further favors, and said she should be left in peace, otherwise she might have to conspire. Then, the woman said, she was sorry that she found it so bad. She had urgently ordered the midwife to make it as good as possible. She truly couldn't believe it was so bad that no one would want to drink it, and there shouldn't be a lack of cream either. She had taken some off, as she didn't usually do. What else could the poor godmother do but have another tart poured for herself? The midwife had been pacing impatiently for a long time, and finally, no longer able to contain herself, she said, "Is there anything I can do to help you? Just say so. I certainly have time." "Hey, don't rush me," said the woman, but the poor godmother, who was smoking like a chimney, understood the hint, procured the hot coffee as quickly as possible, and said between the pauses the blazing drink forced upon her, "I would have been gone long ago if I hadn't had to drink more than I could possibly manage, but I'm coming now." She stood up, unpacked the little bags, handed over braided clothing, a bandage, a shiny new thaler wrapped in the beautifully painted baptismal inscription, and made many apologies that everything wasn't better. But the lady of the house spoke with many explanations, saying there was no way or custom to feast in such a manner, that one almost shouldn't have, and if one had known that, one shouldn't have spoken to her at all. Now the girl, assisted by the midwife and the housewife, set to work, doing her utmost to be a beautiful godmother, from her shoes and stockings right up to the wreath on her precious lace cap. The matter proceeded. It was a complicated process, despite the midwife's impatience, and the godmother was never satisfied with anything, and now this, now that was out of place. Then the grandmother came in and said, "I must come and see how beautiful our godmother is." She casually mentioned that the second bell had already that the second bell had already rung and both godparents were outside in the outer room. Outside, however, sat the two male godparents, one old and one young, disdaining the modern coffee they could have every day. Behind the steamy mugs of warm wine, this ancient but good Bernese soup, made from wine, toasted bread, eggs, sugar, cinnamon, and saffron, that equally ancient spice which must be included in the soup, the first course, and the sweet tea at the christening feast. They enjoyed their meal. An old godfather, whom they called cousin, had all sorts of jokes with the man in childbed, saying to him they wouldn't spare him today, and had finished after the wine. He begrudged them. Nothing was spared. They should see that he was given his 12-pound sack to the messenger to take to Bern last Tuesday to bring him saffron. When they didn't know what the cousin meant by that, he said recently his neighbor had to go into childbed. He gave the messenger a large sack and 6 cruisers with the instruction he should bring him in this sack 6 cruisers of the yellow powder, a measure or 1.5 measures, of which one must have in everything at christenings. His wives wanted it that way. Then the godmother came in like a young morning sun, and was welcomed by the other godparents. Gott Wilchen. She was summoned and pulled to the table, and a large plate full of warm wine was placed before her, which she was to eat. She surely had time while the child was being prepared. The poor godmother resisted with all her might, claiming she had eaten enough for many a day and could no longer breathe. But nothing helped. Old and young alike followed her with mockery and earnestness, until she took up the spoon, and strangely enough, one spoonful after another found its place. But then the midwife came again with the beautifully swaddled child, put the embroidered cap with the rose-red silk ribbon on him, laid it in the lovely little blanket, put the sweet pacifier in his mouth, and said she didn't want to miss anyone, and had thought she wanted to get everything ready so that they could always leave whenever they wanted. They stood around the child and praised him as it was only right. And he was indeed a wonderfully handsome little boy. The mother was pleased with the praise and said, I would have loved to come to church too and help commend it to God. And when you are there yourself with the child, when the child is baptized, you reflect all the more on what you have promised. Besides, it is so inconvenient for me not to be allowed outside for another whole week. Now that everyone is so busy planting. But the grandmother said it wasn't so bad that her daughter-in-law shouldn't have to go to church like a poor woman for the first 8 days. And the midwife added she didn't like it at all when young women went to church with the children. They were always afraid that something wrong was going on at home and didn't have the proper devotion in church and on the Hold on, it just takes a page second to load. And on the way home, they pressed too hard so that nothing would be missed, and they became overheated, and many even became very ill and died. Then the godmother took the child in the comforter in her arms. The midwife laid the beautiful white baptismal cloth with the black tassels in the corners over the child, carefully protecting the lovely bouquet of flowers on the godmother's breast, and said, now go in God's holy name. And the grandmother clasped her hands together and silently prayed a fervent blessing. But the mother went out with the procession to the door and said, my little boy, now I won't see you for 3 whole hours. How will I bear it? And immediately it flashed into her eyes. She quickly wiped them with the apron and went into the house. The godmother strode swiftly down the slope along the church path, the lively child in her strong arms, followed by the 2 godchildren, father and grandfather, neither of whom thought to relieve the godmother of her burden, although the younger children wore the sign of being free at last. Although the younger godfather wore the sign of being free of his hat in a stately May, and something shone in his eye like great pleasure in the godmother, though all of this was hidden behind a mask of great composure. The grandfather recounted what terrible weather it had been when he was carried to church. The churchgoers had scarcely believed they would escape with their lives from the hail and lightning. Afterwards, people had made all sorts of predictions about him. Because of the weather, some a terrible death, others great fortune and war. But now it had gone quietly for him, just like for the others, and in his 75th year he would rather die early. He would rather neither die early nor experience great things. This takes forever to load each page. Come on, my little turtle dove. On the way home, they pressed too hard, here we go. To make luck in war. They had gone more than halfway when the maiden... Wait, did I already read this page? Hold on one second. No, okay, wait a minute. The way that this is like the online reader thing is like... To make luck in war. They had gone more than halfway when the maiden came bounding after them, the one who was to carry the child home as soon as it was baptized, while the parents and godparents, according to old beautiful custom, were still attending the sermon. The maiden had also wanted to exert herself to the best of her ability to be beautiful because of this handy task. She had become late and now wanted to take the child from the godmother, but the godmother wouldn't let her, no matter how much they tried to persuade her. This was a very good opportunity to show the handsome unmarried godfather how strong her arms were and how much they could endure. Strong arms of a woman are far more fitting for a proper peasant than delicate ones, than such flimsy sticks that any breeze, if so seriously desires, can blow apart. Strong arms on a mother have been a blessing to many children when the father died, and the mother had to guide the rod alone lift the household cart out of every hole it wanted to fall into. But suddenly, as if someone is holding the strong godmother by her braids, or striking her on the head, she rebounds firmly, gives the child to the Virgin, then stays behind and pretends to be busy with the garter. Then she comes along, joins the men, mingles with their conversation, tries to interrupt the grandfather, distracting him now with this, now with that from the object he has grasped. But he, as old people usually do, holds fast to his object and tirelessly reties the broken thread. Now she sets her sights on the child's father and tries to entice him into private conversations by asking him all sorts of questions. But he is monosyllabic and keeps dropping the spun thread. Perhaps he has his own thoughts, as every father should have when a child is brought to him for baptism, and especially the first little boy. The closer one got to the church, the more people joined the procession. Some were already waiting by the roadside with psalm books in their hands. Others hurried down the narrow footpaths, and like a little procession, they moved into the village. Near the church stood the inn, two houses so often closely connected, sharing joys and sorrows, and indeed honorably. There they part. The boy was dried off, and the nanny ordered a measure of wine, despite everyone's pleas that he shouldn't, that they had just had what their hearts desired and wanted neither fat nor thin wine. However, once the wine was there, everyone drank it, especially the young woman. She must have thought that she had to drink wine if someone wanted to give her some, and that didn't happen often throughout a long year. Only the godmother couldn't be persuaded to drink a single drop, despite all the endless coaxing, until the landlady said one should ease up on the necessity. The girl was growing paler by the minute, and Hoffman's drops would do her no more harm than wine. But the godmother wouldn't have those either, scarcely a glass of plain water, and finally had to let someone pour a few drops from a smelling bottle onto her handkerchief. Innocently, she attracted many suspicious glances, and couldn't accept help. The godmother suffered from terrible anxiety, and couldn't let it be known. No one had told her what name the child should receive, and which the godmother, according to old custom, is to whisper to the pastor when she hands the child over to him, since he can easily mix up the written names when there are many children to be baptized. In the haste, because of the many things to be done, and the fear of being late, the communication of this name had been forgotten, and her father's sister, the aunt, had strictly forbidden her to ask about this name once and for all, if she did not want to make a child unhappy. For as soon as a godmother asked about the child's name, the child would be curious for the rest of its life. She didn't know this name, so it wasn't allowed to ask. And even if the pastor had forgotten it and asked it loudly and publicly, or even if he called the boy Medali or Bibali in verse, how people would laugh and what a disgrace that would be for the rest of her life. This seemed more and more dreadful to her. The strong girl's legs trembled like bean plants in the wind, and sweat streamed down her pale face. Now the innkeeper urged them to leave if they didn't want to be reprimanded by the pastor. But to the godmother she said, "You girl, you can't stand it. You're as white as a freshly washed shirt. It's from running," she thought. "It will get better when I get some fresh air." But it didn't get better. Everyone in the church seemed completely black to her, and now the child started to scream murderously, and more murderously. The poor godmother began to rock it in her arms, harder and harder. Okay, come on, my little turtle dove. The louder it cried, the more leaves flew from its chest. On that chest it grew tighter and heavier. Her gasping for breath could be heard loudly. The higher her chest rose, the higher the child flew in her arms. And the higher it flew, the louder it cried. And the louder it cried, the more powerfully the priest recited the prayers. The voices rattled properly against the walls, and the godmother no longer knew where she was. It roared and swirled around her like ocean waves, and the church danced with her in the air. Finally, the pastor said amen, and now the terrible moment had arrived. Now it would be decided whether she would become a laughingstock to her children and grandchildren. Now she had to lift the cloth, give the child to the pastor, and whisper the name in his ear. She uncovered it, but trembling and shaking, the latter made no move. The more leaves flew from its chest. On that chest it grew tighter and heavier. Her gasping for breath could be heard loudly. The higher her chest rose, the higher the child flew in her arms. The higher it flew, the louder it cried, and the louder it cried, the more powerfully the priest recited the prayers. The voices rattled properly against the walls, and the godmother no longer knew where she was. It roared and swirled around her like ocean waves, and the church danced with her in the air. Finally, the pastor said amen, and now the terrible moment had arrived. Now would be decided whether she would become a laughingstock to her child and grandchildren. Now she had to lift the cloth, give the child to the pastor, whisper the name in his ear. She uncovered it, but trembling and shaking, she handed over the child, and the pastor took it, didn't look at her, didn't question her with a sharp eye, dipped his hand in the water, moistened the forehead of the suddenly silent child, and baptized not a girl, not a boy, but Hans Uli, an honest, real Hans Uli. Then it was as if not only all the mountains of the Emmental Valley had fallen from her heart, but also from the sun, moon, and stars, and as someone were carrying her from a fiery furnace into a cool bath, but throughout the entire sermon her limbs trembled and would not become still again. The pastor preached beautifully and eloquently, explaining how human life should be nothing other than an ascension, but it didn't bring the godmother to true devotion, and when they came out of the sermon, she had already forgotten the text. She couldn't wait until she could reveal her secret fear and the reason for her pale face. There was much laughter, and she had to listen to many a joke about curiosity and how women feared it, yet clung to all their girls while doing nothing to the boys. She could have simply asked. Beautiful fields of oats, charming flax beds, and the splendid growth of meadows and fields soon attracted attention and captivated their minds. They found many reasons to walk slowly and stand still, and yet the beautiful, rising May sun had warmed everyone by the time they returned home, and a glass of cool wine was welcome to everyone, however much they might have resisted it. Then they sat down in front of the house, while in the kitchen, hands busily stirred, the fire crackling mightily. The midwife glowed like one of the three chosen from the fiery oven. Before 11 o'clock, they called for dinner. Before 11 o'clock, they called for dinner, but only the servants, who were fed first, and quite a lot at that, but they were still glad when they, especially the farm hands, got out of their way. The conversation flowed somewhat slowly among those sitting in front of the house, but it didn't cease. Before a meal, the thoughts of the stomach disturb the thoughts of the soul, but one doesn't like to acknowledge this inner state, instead masking it with slow words about indifferent matters. The sun was already above midday when the midwife, her face aglow but her apron still clean, appeared under the door and brought the welcome news to all that they could eat if everyone had arrived. But most of those invited were still missing, and the messengers who had been sent for them earlier, like the servants in the gospel, brought all sorts of messages, with the difference, however, that they all actually wanted to come, only now no one had workers, another had hired people, and the third still had to go somewhere, but one shouldn't wait for them, but rather just keep going with the matter. It was soon considered advisable to follow this advice, for if one had to wait for everyone, it was said it could go on until the moon came. Meanwhile, the midwife grumbled there was nothing more foolish than such waiting. Deep down, everyone would gladly be there, and the sooner the better, but no one should notice. Otherwise, one would have to go to the trouble of putting everything back in the warmth, never know if one has enough, and never finish. Although the council had quickly formed a committee regarding those who were absent, they were not yet finished with those who were present. It was quite a struggle to get them into the room and seated, for no one wanted to be first, neither with this person nor with that one. When everyone was finally seated, the soup was brought to the table, a fine meat soup, colored and seasoned with saffron and so thickly soaked with a lovely white bread that grandmother had sliced, that little of the broth was visible. Then everyone bared their heads, folded their hands, and each person prayed long and solemnly to the giver of every good gift. Then slowly they reached for the tin spoon, wiped it on the beautiful white tablecloth, and began to eat the soup. Many a wish was voiced that if they could have such a soup every day, they would desire nothing else. When the soup was finished, the spoons were wiped on the tablecloth again, and braided loaves were passed around. Everyone cut off their own piece, and they watched as the stews were served with saffron broth, stews of brains of muttons and sour liver. When that was finished, they were taking deliberate steps. In high bowls, beef arrived, green and lean, to each their own, along with dry beans and slices of pitcher pears, broad slabs of bacon, and magnificent backs of 300-pound pigs, so beautifully red and white and juicy. This all followed slowly, and when a new guest arrived, everyone was served again, starting with the soup, and everyone had to begin where the others had. No one was given a single dish for free. Meanwhile, Benz, the man who had just given birth, diligently poured drinks from the beautiful white flasks, which contained a measure and were richly decorated with coats of arms and saints. Where his arms could not reach, he carried the cup for others, earnestly urging them to drink, often admonishing, "Just drink, it's meant to be drunk." And when the midwife carried in a bowl, he brought her his glass, and others brought her theirs as well, so that as she had always wanted to properly inform everyone, things could have gotten quite chaotic in the kitchen. The younger godfather had to endure many a mocking remark that he didn't know how to get his godmother to drink any better. If he didn't understand how to make people healthy better, he'd never get a wife. Oh, Hans Oli won't want any, said the godmother at last. These days, single lads have quite different things on their minds than marriage, and most of them wouldn't even be capable of it anymore. Hey, said Hans Uli. That's exactly what he thinks. Such slobs, like most girls are these days. Make very expensive wives. Most of them think that to become a good wife, all you need is a little blue silk handkerchief around your head and gloves in the summer. And embroidered slippers in the winter. If you lacked cows in the barn, you were certainly bad off. But you could change things. But if you had a wife who robbed you of your house and farm, well, that's that. You had to keep her. It would therefore be more useful to think about other things than marriage and let girls be girls. Yes, you're quite right, said the older godfather, a small, unassuming man in simple clothes, who was nevertheless held in high esteem and called cousin, for he had no children, but did have a paid-off farm, and 100,000 Swiss francs in rent. Yes, you're right, he said. There's nothing left to women these days. I don't mean to say that there isn't one here and there that would suit a household, but they are far and few between. They have nothing but foolishness and pride on their minds. They dress like peacocks, strut like stormy storks, and if one of them is supposed to work for half a day, she has a headache for 3 days and lies in bed for 4 days before she's back with herself. When I was courting my old lady, things were different. You didn't have to be so worried about getting a house fool or even a house devil instead of a good housewife. Hey, Godfather Uli, said the godmother, who had wanted to speak for a long time but hadn't gotten round to it. One would think that only in your time were there proper peasant daughters. You simply don't know them and no longer respect the girls as befits such an old man, but they are still as plentiful as when your wife was still young. I don't want to boast, but my father has sometimes said that if I continue like this, I'll go through my late mother, and she was quite a famous woman. My father never took such heavy pigs to market as last year. The butcher sometimes told him he'd like to see the girl who fattened them up. But one has to complain about today's boys. What on earth is wrong with them? They can bake, sit in the tavern, wear their white hats on their sides and open their eyes like city gates, and flirt with every bowler, every shooter, every bad girl. That's all they can do. But if someone is supposed to milk a cow or drive a field, he's done for, and if he picks up a piece of wood, he acts as dumb as a gentleman or even as a scribe. I've often talked myself into thinking I don't want a husband, or that I know for sure how I manage with him, and even if someone here and there still pretends to be a farmer, you still don't know what kind of man he'll turn out to be. Then the others laughed heartily, making the girl's face flush with blood and mocking her. How long did she think it would take to put someone to the test before they knew for sure what kind of man he would become? Amidst laughter and jest, they ate a good deal of meat, not forgetting the pear slices either, until finally the old godfather said he thought it was time to stop for a while and get away from the table for a while. One's legs get stiff under the table, and a pipe never tastes better than after eating meat. This advice received general approval, as did the woman in childbed who insisted one shouldn't leave the table once one is away from it. One can hardly bring people back. More on this. Don't worry, cousin, said the cousin. If you put something good on the table, you'll have us with you again with little effort, and if we stretch a little, it will be all the easier to eat again. The men then made their way around the stables, glancing at the hayloft to see if there was any old hay left, praised the beautiful grass, and looked up into the trees to see how great the blessing might be that could be hoped for from them. The cousin stopped under one of the still blooming trees and said that would be the best place to sit down and light a pipe. It's nice and cool there, and if the woman had prepared something good again, one could be close at hand. Soon the godmother joined them, who had been inspecting the garden and the planting areas with the other woman. The other women followed the godmother, and one after the other they sat down on the grass, carefully securing their beautiful smocks while exposing their petticoats with their bright red edges to the danger of being stained by the green grass. The tree around which the whole group was lounging stood above the house at the gentle beginning of the slope. The beautiful new house was the first thing that caught the eye. Beyond it, one's gaze could wander to the edge of the valley the other side, over many a beautiful, prosperous farm, and further on over green hills and dark valleys. You have a stately house there, and everything is well laid out, said the cousin. Now you can be there too and have room for everything. I could never. To understand how one can suffer for so long. To such a bad house when one has enough money and wood to build as you do, for example. Don't confuse me, cousin, said the grandfather. There's nothing to boast about either. Besides, building is a wild business. You know how to start, but never how to finish, and sometimes this or that gets in your way, something different in every place. I like this house very much, said one of the women. We should have had a new one for a long time, but we always balk at the cost. As soon as my husband comes, he must see this properly. It seems to me that if we could have one like this, I would be in heaven. But I would like to ask, please don't take offense, why there is that drab black window post still right next to the first window. It looks so bad in the whole house. The grandfather made a worried face, puffed even harder on his pipe, and finally said, We were short of wood for the construction. There wasn't any other wood readily available. So in our need and haste, we took some from the old house. But, said the wife, that black piece of wood was too short anyway. It's joined at the top and bottom, and every neighbor would have gladly given you a brand new piece. Yes, we just didn't have any better intentions and couldn't keep bothering our neighbors. They had already helped us enough with wood and transport, replied the old man. Listen, Iady, said the cousin, don't play games, but tell the truth and give an honest report. I've heard many things whispered, but never the truth itself. Now he sent. I'm so comfortable until the women have finished the roast. You'd only give us a short time, so give us an honest report. The grandfather made many a fuss before he came to the conclusion, but the cousin and the woman wouldn't let up until he finally promised, dull with the express reservation, that he would prefer what he told them to stay between them and get no further. Many people in the house are wary of such things, and he did. He didn't want to play a bad trick on his family in his old age. Every time I look at this wood, began the venerable old man, I must wonder how it came about that the people from the distant Orient, where humankind is said to have originated, came all the way here and found this corner in this narrow ditch. And I must think that those who were driven or persecuted to this point must have endured, and who they might have been. I have inquired much about it, but have been able to learn nothing except that this region was inhabited very early on. Indeed, Summerswold is said to have been a city even before our Savior was born. But what is written here, nowhere. But it is known that it has been more than 600 years since the castle stood, where the hospital is now, and probably around the same time a house early stood here, and belonged along with a large part of the surrounding area to the castle, and had to pay tithes and ground rents there, perform corvée labor. Indeed, the people were serfs and not in their own right, as everyone as soon as they reached adulthood. People had very unequal lives back then, and very close to one another. Serfs lived there, some having the best deals, and others who were oppressed served almost unbearably, and what lives were not safe. Their condition depended at times on their lords. These were very unequal, yet almost absolute masters over their people, and the people found no one to whom they could complain so easily and effectively. Those who belonged to the castle are said to have had it worse at times than most who belonged to other castles. Most other castles belonged to one family, passed down from father to son. There the lord and his people knew each other from their youth, and many were like a father to their people. This castle came early into the hands of knights known here as the Germans, and the one in command here was called the commander. The commanders changed frequently, sometimes from Saxony and sometimes from Swabia. No loyalty developed, and each brought the customs and traditions of his own region. Now they were supposed to be fighting the heathens in Poland and Prussia, and there, although they were actually clerical knights, they almost became accustomed to a pagan life and interacted with other people as if there were no God in heaven. And when they came home, they still thought they were in pagan lands and continued the same way of life. For those who preferred to live merrily in the shadows, rather than fight bloodily in the wilderness, or those who needed to heal their wounds and strengthen their bodies, ended up on the estates that the order, as the Society of Knights was supposedly called, owned in Germany and Switzerland, and each did according to his own way, and that was appropriate for him. Pleased, one of the wildest was said to have been Hans von Stolfen from Swabia, and it was under him what you want to know from me, and what has passed down from father to son in our family, is said to have happened. This Hans von Stolfen decided to build a large castle there on the Barengunhobel hill, there where even now, when wild weather threatens, one can see the castle ghosts basking in their treasures, stood the castle. Otherwise, knights built their castles above the roads, just as inns are now built by the roads, both to be able to plunder people more easily, albeit in different ways. But why the knight wanted a castle there on that wild, desolate hill in the wilderness, we don't know. Enough he wanted it, and the peasants who belonged to the castle had to build it. The knight didn't ask about any work required by the season, not about haymaking, not about the harvest, not about sowing. So many wagons had to be brought in. So many hands had to work. By such and such a time, the last tile had to be laid, the last nail driven. For this he gave no sheaf, no measure of ground rest, no Shrove Tuesday chicken, not even a Shrove Tuesday egg. He knew no mercy. He was unaware of the needs of poor people. He spurred them on in pagan manner with blows and insults, and if someone grew tired, moved more slowly, or even wanted to rest, the bailiff was behind him with his whip, and neither age nor weakness was spared. When the wild knights were up there, they enjoyed it when the whip cracked properly, and otherwise they drove many a man to mischief, pranks on the workers. If they could willfully double their work, they would not spare it, and they then took great pleasure in it, in their fear and their sweat. Finally, the castle was finished. The walls 5 ells thick. Nobody knew why it stood up there, but the peasants were glad that it finally stood. If it had to stand, the last nail driven, the last brick in place. They wiped the sweat from their brows and looked around their property with heavy hearts, and sighed at how far the wretched construction had brought them back. But a long summer lay before them, and God was above them. So they took up their courage and strung the plough, and comforted wife and child who had suffered severe hunger and for whom work seemed a new torment. But scarcely had they laid the plough into the field, when news arrived that all the farm hands were to assemble at a castle in Somerswald at a certain hour one evening. They were anxious and hopeful, admittedly, that they had experienced nothing good from the current inhabitants of the castle, only wantonness and harshness. But it seemed fair to them that the lords should do something for their extraordinary labor, and because they thought so, many assumed the lords thought so too, and that they would give them a gift or announce a remission that very evening. They arrived early on the appointed evening, their hearts pounding, but had to wait a long time in the castle courtyard, much to the amusement of the servants. The servants also had also been the pagan lands. Moreover, it must have been like now, where every half-bred lord Candlelight believes he has the right to despise and mock settled peasants. Finally, they were moved into the knight's hall. They were summoned into the knight's hall. Before them, the very heavy door opened. Inside, round the heavy oak table, sat the black and brown knights, wild dogs at their feet, and at the head of the table was von Stolfen, a wild, powerful man with a head like a double amberjack, eyes like plough wheels, and a beard like an old lion's mane. No one willingly went in first. One pushed the other forward. Then the knights laughed so hard that the wine splashed over their tankards, and the dogs rushed forward in a fury. For when they see trembling, timid limbs, they think they belong to a wild animal to be haunted. But the peasants were not in a good mood. It seemed if only they were home again. They all huddled together. When at last the dogs and knights fell silent, von Stolfen raised his voice, and it sounded like 100-year-old oak. My castle is finished, but one thing is missing. Summer is coming, and there is no shaded walkway up there. Within a month you shall plant one for me. You shall take 100 fully grown beeches from the Mooneberg with branches and roots, and plant them for me on Bargehen. And if a single beech is missing, you will pay for it with your property and your blood. There will be drinks and snacks down below, but tomorrow the first beech tree shall stand on Bargehen. When someone heard about the drink and the snacks, he thought the knight was being gracious and in good mood, and began to talk about their necessary work, the hunger of his wife and the child, and the winter when things could be improved. Then the knight's anger began to swell bigger and bigger, and his voice broke. He sprang like thunder from a cliff and told them if he were to be merciful, they should be arrogant. In Poland, if someone had their bare life, he would kiss their feet. Here they had children and cattle, roof and shelter, and yet still not enough, but I will make you more obedient and more content as surely as I am Hans von Stoffel, and in the 100 beech trees aren't standing at their peaks within a month. I'll have you whipped until not a finger length remains, and I'll throw your wives and children to the dogs. No one dared to object any more, but no one desired the drink and snacks either. When the angry order was given, they pressed out the door, each wanting to be first, and far and wide the knight's thundering voice followed them. The laughter of other knights, the squire's mockery, the hounds howling. When the road bent, and they could no longer be seen from the castle, they sat down by the roadside and wept bitterly. None had any comfort for the other, and none had the courage for true anger, for hardship and toil had extinguished their courage, so that they had no strength left for anger, but only a lamentation. For over 3 hours they were to lead the beech trees, with branches and roots, up the steep mountain through wild paths. And beside this mountain grew many beautiful beech trees, and these they had to leave standing. The work was to be completed within a month. For 2 days they had to haul 3 trees, and on the third day 4, through the long valley up the steep mountain, with their exhausted cattle, and above all this it was May, when the farmer had to work in his field almost day and night. He must not leave him at night if he wants bread and food for the winter. As they wept there helpless, no one daring to look at another, to gaze into another's misery, for their own was already collapsing upon them, and no one daring to go home with the news, no one wishing to carry the misery home to wife and child, suddenly before them, from where they knew not, stood a tall and thin green huntsman. On his jaunty beret a red feather bobbed, on his black face a red moustache blazed, and between his crooked nose and pointed chin, almost invisibly, like a cave beneath an overhanging rock, a mouth opened and asked, "What is it, good people, that you are here?" It sits and howls so loudly that it throws stones out of the ground and branches off the trees. Twice he asked, and twice he received no answer. Then the green man's black face grew even blacker, his red beard even redder. It seemed to crackle and sputter within like fire in fir wood. His mouth sharpened like an arrow. Then he opened it wide and asked quite sweetly and gently, "But you good people, what good does it do you to sit there and howl? You can howl until there's another flood, and your cries blow the stars out of the sky, but this will probably do you little good. But if people ask you what's wrong, people who mean well, who might be able to help you, then instead of howling, you should you should answer and speak a sensible word that would help you much more." Then an old man shook his white head and said, "Don't take it the wrong way, but what we weep over, no huntsman will take. We give up, and when the heart is swollen with sorrow, no words can come out." Then the green one shook his pointed head and said, "Father, you're not talking nonsense. But that's not how it is. You can strike whatever you want, stone or tree, and it will make a sound. It will complain. So should man complain. Should everything complain? Should complain to the first person he meets. Perhaps the first person he meets who will help him. I'm just a hunter. Who knows if I don't have a capable team at home to guide wood and stones or beech and fir trees." When the poor peasants heard the word team, it touched their hearts, became a spark of hope, and all eyes looked to him, and the old man's mouth opened even wider. He said, "It is not always right to tell the best person what is on one's heart. But since one could hear that he meant well, they might be able to help. One could not keep secrets from him." For more than 2 years they had suffered greatly under the new castle construction. There was not a single household in the entire state that was not bitterly destitute. Now they had breathed a fresh sigh of relief, believing that they had finally had free hands for their own work, and with renewed courage had led the plow into the field. And just so the commander had ordered them to plant a new shady walkway near the castle within a month, using beech trees growing in the moon woods. They didn't know how they could accomplish this in such a short time with their hauled livestock. And even if they did, what good would it do them? They couldn't plant the trees and would likely starve to death afterward, if the hard labor didn't kill them first. This message may. They do not want to carry it home. They do not want to add any new misery to the old misery. Then the green one made a most pitying face, raising his long, thin black hand threateningly towards the castle, and presumed to inflict severe punishment on such tyranny. But he would help them. His team, the likes of which existed in the land, would lead them from Kilchstalden on this side of Somerswald to Barhagen, all the beech trees they could manage to bring there, for their benefit in defiance of the knights, and for a small reward. The poor man listened intently to this unexpected offer. If they could agree on the wages, they could be saved, for they could lead the beech trees as far as Kilchstalden without neglecting their farm's work and perishing. Therefore the old man said, "Tell us what you demand so that we may come to an agreement with you." Then the green-haired man made a sly face, his beard crackled, and his eyes glittered like snakes' eyes, and a grayish laugh stood at both corners of his mouth as he parted them and said, "As I said, I don't desire much, no more than an unbaptized child." The word flashed through the men like lightning, fell like a blanket from their eyes, and scattered like chaff in a whirlwind. Then the green one laughed brightly, so that the fish in the brook hid themselves. The birds sought the thicket, and the feather on the hat swung horribly up and down like went the little beard. "Repent or seek counsel from your wives. On the third night you will find me here again." He shouted after the fleeing man in a sharp, ringing voice, so that the words stuck in his ears like barbed arrows stuck in flesh. Pale and trembling in spirit and in every limb, the men fled home. None looked back at another. None would have turned their neck, not for all the goods in the world. As the men came scattering in such a daze, like doves chased by a bird into a dovecote, terror swept through all the houses, and everyone trembled at the news that had so thrown the men's limbs into disarray. Trembling with curiosity, the women crept after the men until they found them in places where they could speak a private word. There each man had to tell his wife what she had heard in the castle, which they listened to with fury and cursing. They had to recount who they had met and what he had offered them. The nameless fear seized the woman. A cry of woe sounded over the hill and dale, and each felt as if the wicked man may desire her own child. Only one woman did not cry out like the others. She was a cruelly wicked woman, and to have been from Lindau, and she had lived here in the courtyard. She had wild black eyes and did not fear God much. People. She had already become angry that the men hadn't outright refused the knight's request. If she'd been there, and she would have wanted to tell him, she said. When she heard about the green one and his proposal and how the men had fled, she became truly angry and scolded the men for their cowardice, for not having looked the green one more boldly in the face, and perhaps he would have been won over with a different reward. That was enough, and since the work was for the castle, it would harm her soul no one if the devil did it. She was furious in her soul that she hadn't been there, if only to have seen the devil once and know what he looked like. Therefore this woman didn't weep, but in her anger spoke harsh words against her own husband and against all of the men. The following day, when the wailing had subsided into silent whimper, the men sat together, sought counsel, and found none. At first there was talk of appealing to the knight again, but no one wanted to go and plead. No one felt their life was at stake. One man wanted to send wives and children with howls and lamentations, but he quickly fell silent when the woman began to speak. For even when the women were nearly always ready when the men sat in council, they knew no other course of action than to try obedience in God's name. They wanted to have masses and to gain God's help. They wanted to ask their neighbors for secret help at night, for their lords would not offer them any open assistance. They were allowed to divide the land. Half would work among the beech trees, the other half sow oats and tend to the cattle. They hoped that in this way, that with God's help, they could manage at least 300 beech trees, or at least 3 beech trees a day on Barhagen. No one spoke of the greenery. Whether no one thought about it was not at all recorded. They divided the work properly among themselves and prepared their tools, and when the first day of May arrived, the men gathered at Mooneberg and began their work with composure. They had to dig up the beech trees in a wide circle, carefully protecting their roots. The trees were carefully lowered to the ground so as not to injure each other. Morning was still light when 3 beech trees lay ready for the departure, for they were always to be led together in groups of 3, so that they could help each other with hand and beast on the difficult path. But the sun was already at midday, and they had not yet left the forest with the 3 beech trees. They were already behind the mountains. The procession had yet passed beyond Sumiswald. Only the new morning found them at the foot of the mountains on which the castle stood, and the beech trees were to be planted. It was as if some unforgiving evil spirit held power over them. One misfortune after another befell. Harnesses broke, wagons broke, horses and oxen fell and refused to obey. The second day was even worse. New hardship constantly brought new toil. The poor laborers panted under tireless work, and not a single beech tree remained. Not a 4th beech tree but had been brought beyond Summerswald. Stolfen scolded and cursed. The more he scolded and cursed, the greater the bad luck grew. The more sluggish the cattle became. The other knights laughed and sneered and rejoiced greatly at the peasants fighting at von Stolfen's anger. They had laughed at von Stolfen's new castle on the bare summit. Then he had sworn within a month there must be a beautiful leafy walkway up there. That is why he cursed. That is why the knights laughed and the peasants wept. A terrible despondency gripped them, and they had no wagon left, no train undamaged. He hadn't managed to get 3 beech trees into place in 2 days, and all his strength was exhausted. Night had fallen. Black clouds rose, and the lightning flashed for the first time this year. The men sat down by the roadside in the same bend of the road where they had sat 3 days before. Though they didn't know it, there sat the farmer from Hornbach, the husband of the woman from Lindau, with 2 farmhands, and others sat with them as well. They wanted to wait there for beech trees that were supposed to come from Sumiswald, to ponder their misery undisturbed, to rest their broken limbs. Then, quick as a flash, almost whistling like the other wind when it escapes from its chambers, a woman came along, a large basket on her head. It was Christine from Lindau, the wife of the farmer from Hornbach, as to have come after he had gone off to war with his lord. She was not one of those women who are happy to be home, quietly going through their business, and who care about nothing but the house and child. Christine wanted to know what was going on, and where she couldn't offer her advice, things would go badly, she thought. Therefore, she had not sent a maid with the food, but had carried the heavy basket out of her own head and searched for the men for a long time in vain. She spoke bitterly about it as soon as she found them. Meanwhile, however, she was not idle. She could still talk and work at the same time. She put down the basket, covered the tub containing the porridge, arranged the bread and cheese, and placed the spoons into a porridge opposite each man and servant, and told the others to help themselves as well. Who were still without food. Then she asked about the men's daily work and how much had been accomplished in the 2 days. But the men were both hungry and speechless, and none of them picked up a spoon. And none of them had an answer, only one frivolous farmhand who didn't care whether it rained or shone during the harvest, as long as the year ended and the wages came, and the food was placed on the table at every mealtime. Picked up a spoon and told Christine that not a single beech tree had been planted yet, and everything was going as if they were bewitched. Then the woman from Lindau cried out that it was all mere imagination, and the men nothing but childbearers, with toiling and weeping, with squatting and howling. No beeches would grow on Barhagen. They would only get their due if the knights took out their courage on them. But for the sake of wives and children, the matter had to be handled differently. Suddenly a long black hand appeared over the woman's shoulder, and a shrill voice, "Yes, she is right." And right in the middle of them stood the green one, with a grinning face, and the red feather of his hat swung merrily. The fright lifted the men away, and they scattered the slope like chaff in a whirlwind. Only Christine, the woman from Landau, could not escape. She experienced firsthand how one can see the devil in the flesh when one paints him on the wall. She stood there as if spellbound, forced to look at the red feather of the beret and how the little red beard merrily went up and down again on the black fire. The green man laughed shrilly after the men, but Christine, he made a tender face and took her hand with a courteous gesture. Christine wanted to pull her away, but she could no longer escape the green man. It was like sizzling flesh between red-hot pincers, and he began to speak beautiful words, and to the words his red beard licked lustfully up and down. He hadn't seen such a beautiful woman in a long time. Excuse me, he said. His heart was laughing inside, moreover. He liked her to be brave, and those were precisely the ones he loved best, and the ones who were allowed to stand still when the man ran away. As he spoke, Christine found the green man less and less frightening. Surely one could still reason with him, she thought, and she didn't know why run away. She had seen many wilder people before. The thought kept coming to her. Something could be done with him, and if one knew how to talk to him properly, he might well do one a favor, or in the end, one could outwit him like the other men. He simply didn't know. The green man continued why people were so afraid of him. He meant so well by everyone, and if people were so rude to him, they shouldn't be surprised if he didn't always do what they liked best. Then Christine took heart and answered, he frightened people so much that it was terrible. Why had he asked for an unbaptized child? He could have talked of a different reward. People found it very suspicious. A child is always a person, and no Christian would give one away unbaptized. That is my reward, the one I'm used to, and I ask for nothing else. And why would anyone ask for such a child whom no one even knows? People prefer to give them away so young, since they have no joy in them yet and no trouble with them. But I have. The younger the better. The sooner I can raise a child on my own way, the further I can take it. But for that I have no need for baptism and do not want it. Then Christine saw that he would not be satisfied with any other reward. But the thought grew more and more in her. He would be the only one who could not be cheated. Therefore, she said, if someone wanted to earn something, he would have to be content with the wages that could be given him. But they currently had no unbaptized child in the NA house, and there would be none in the next month, and the beech trees had to be delivered by then. At that point, the green man curtsied himself very politely and said, I don't want the child in advance at all. As soon as I am promised that the first unbaptized child to be born will be delivered to me, I will be quite satisfied. That pleased Christine very much. She knew that there would be no child in her lord's territory for quite some time. Once the green man had kept his promise and the beech trees were planted, there was no need to give him anything anymore, neither a child nor anything else. Let them have masses read for protection and defense, and bravely laugh at the green man, thought Christine. She therefore thanked him heartily for the kind offer, and said that it was something to consider and that she would discuss it with the men. Yes, said the green man. There's nothing more to think or say about it. I've appointed you for today, and now I want your answer. I have many other things to do, and I'm not here just for you. You must agree or decline. Otherwise, I want nothing more to do with the whole deal. Christine wanted to twist the story because she didn't like taking responsibility for it. She would even have been willing to be affectionate in order to obtain a reprieve. But the green man was not in the mood. He would not waver. It was now or never, he said. But as soon as the bargain was struck for a single child, he would lead as many beech trees up to bargain every night as were delivered to him before midnight at the bottom of the church valley, and there he would receive her. Well, for a woman. Don't hesitate, said the green man, and patted Christine sweetly on the cheek. Then her heart pounded. She would have preferred to stab the man in the back so she could blame them everywhere afterward. But time was pressing. There was no man to make a scapegoat, and she wavered in her belief that she was more cunning than the green man. And then an idea would surely arise to outwit him. Therefore Christine said she would agree for herself, but if later the man refused, she would not renege on that, and that he should not let her off the hook. The green man said he was sufficiently satisfied with her promise to do what he could. Now Christine shuddered in body and soul. Now that she thought the terrible moment had come when she would have to sign the agreement with the Green Man in her own blood. But the Green Man made it much easier and said he never demanded a signature from pretty woman. A kiss was enough for him. Thus he pointed his mouth toward Christine's face. And Christine could not escape. She was once again spellbound, stiff and rigid. Then the pointed mouth touched Christine's face, and it was as if fire from sharp iron were piercing her marrow and bone. Through body and soul, and a yellow flash went between them and showed Christine joyfully distorted. Now this is getting interesting. The Green's devilish face and a thunderstorm swept over her, as if the sky had shattered. The Green One had vanished, and Christine stood as if turned to stone, as if her feet had driven roots deep into the ground in the terrible moment. At last her limbs were strong again, but her mind roared and raged as if a mighty torrent were rolling its floods down towering cliffs into a black abyss. Just as one cannot hear one's own voice in the thunder of water, so Christine was unaware of her own thoughts and the roar that thundered in her mind. Involuntarily, she fled up the mountain, and ever more intensely. She felt a burning sensation on her cheek where the Green One's mouth had touched her. She rubbed and washed, but the fire did not subside. It was a wild night. In the air and the clefts there was howling and roaring, as if the spirits of the night were holding a wedding in the black clouds. The winds playing wild rounds in their gruesome dance. The lightning, the wedding torches, and the thunder, the wedding blessing. Such a night had never been experienced at this time of year. In a dark mountain valley, a large house stirred, and many crowded around its sheltering roof. Normally in a thunderstorm, fearful one's hearth drives the farmer under his own roof, and keeping watch carefully as long as the storm rages in the sky, he protects and guards his house. But now the common need was greater than the fear of the storm. This drove them together in this house, past which those whom the storm drove from Nuremberg and those who were from Barhagen fled, forgetting the horror of the night. Because of their own misery, they could be heard lamenting and grumbling about their misfortune. To make matters worse, nature had unleashed its fury. Horses and oxen had become skittish, stunned, had smashed wagons, plunged over rocks, and meanly severed wood, wounded, groaned in deep pain. Many cried out loudly as their torn limbs were pulled in and bound together. Into this misery, those who had seen the Green One also fled in dreadful fear, and trembling they recounted the repeated appearances. Trembling, the crowd listened to what the men told them, pressed from the wide dark space toward the fire around which the men sat, and whenever the wind rumbled through the rafters or thunder rolled over the house, the crowd shouted loudly, thinking that the Green One would break the roof to appear in their midst. But when he did not come, when the terror of him subsided, when the old misery remained and the lament of the suffering grew louder, then gradually the thoughts arose that so readily rob a person in distress of their soul. They began to calculate how much more valuable they all are than a single unbaptized child. They forget excuse me. They forgot more and more that the guilt of one soul weighs 1,000 times heavier than the savings of 1,000 and thousands of human lives. These thoughts gradually grew louder and began to mingle as intelligible words with the groans of pain and the suffering. People inquired further about the Green, grumbling that they couldn't bear it, People inquired further about the Green, grumbling that they couldn't speak better to him. He hadn't taken anything from anyone, and the less one feared him, the less he harmed them. People, they might have been able to help the whole valley if they had had their hearts in the right place. Then the man began to apologize. They didn't say that one shouldn't joke with the devil, that whoever lent him an ear would soon have to give him their whole head. But they spoke of the Green One's terrible form, his flaming beard, the fiery feather of his hat, like a castle tower, and the dreadful sulphurous smell that they could not have borne. But Christine's husband, who was accustomed to his word only gaining power through his wife's approval, said they should just ask his wife. She could tell them if anyone could have endured it, and everyone knew that she was a cursed woman. Then everyone looked around for Christine, but no one saw her. Everyone had only thought of their own rescue, and not of others, and just as everyone was now left high and dry, they assumed the others were in the same boat. Only now did everyone realize that they hadn't seen Christine since that terrible moment. and she hadn't come into the house. Then the man began to lament, and everyone else with him, for it seemed to them all as if Christine alone knew how to help. Suddenly the door opened and Christine stood among them, her hair dripping, her cheeks flushed red, her eyes burning even more intensely than usual with an uncanny fire. A sympathy Christine was not accustomed to received, and everyone wanted to tell her what they had thought and had said, and how much they had sorrow for her. Christine soon saw what it all meant and hid her inner fire behind mocking words, throwing the men's hasty flight, which was met with surprise, and no one cared for the poor woman, nor did anyone look around to see what the green man was doing with her. Then a storm of curiosity broke out, and everyone wanted to know what the green man had done with her. And those who had the back stood high to hear better, and to see more closely the woman who had been standing so near the green man. She couldn't say anything, Christine thought at first. She didn't deserve it, as strangers had tormented her badly in the valley. The woman had given her a bad name. The men had abandoned her everywhere, and if she weren't a better mind than everyone else, and if she hadn't more courage than everyone else, there would be neither comfort nor way out even now. Christine talked for a long time, hurling harsh words at the woman, who never believed her when she said that Lake Constance was bigger than the castle pond. And the more they pressed her, the harsher she seemed to become, arguing in particular that what she had to say would be misinterpreted, and if things turned out well for her, she would receive no thanks. But if they turned out badly, she'd be burdened with all the blame and their entire responsibility. When at last the whole assembly lay before Christine as if on their knees, pleading and begging, the wounded cried out loudly and pressed on. Christine seemed to soften and begin to tell how she had stood her ground, and made an agreement with the prince, but of the kiss he said nothing. Of the kiss she said nothing of how it had burned her cheek, and how it had shaken her heart. But she told what she had been thinking in her troubled mind ever since. The most important thing would be that the beech trees be moved to Barhagen. It's taking a minute to go to the next page. Come on, my little turtle dove. Oh my god. I need to find like a copy I can just scroll. Oh my god. Alright, well, let me try to just refresh this or something. I might even just buy a copy of this if it's cheap. Hold on, this is taking too long. Then, once they were up there, one can still say what one wants to do. The main thing is that until then, as far as you know, no child will be born among them. Many got a chill down their spine when the story was told, but everyone liked the fact that they could still see what they wanted to do. Only one young woman wept so bitterly that one could have washed one's hands before her eyes, but she said nothing. An old venerable woman, on the other hand, tall and with a face before which one would otherwise have to bow or flee, stepped into the middle and spoke. It would have been wicked to base certainty on uncertainty, and to gamble with eternal life. Whoever consorts with evil will never escape it, and whoever gives it a finger, it will hold on to body and soul. No one can help from this misery, but God will, whoever forsakes him in distress, will sink into distress. But this time, the old woman's speech was despised, and the young woman was told to be silent. And it was said that the crying and wailing would not help her this time, and that she needed help of a different kind. It soon became advisable to try the matter. At worst, it could hardly go badly wrong, but it wasn't the first time that people had been deceived by the worst spirits, and that they themselves knew nothing. A priest would surely find advance and a way out. But in their dark minds, many a person is said to have thought, as they later confessed, they wouldn't risk so much money and effort for the sake of an unbaptized child. When the council was formed according to Christine's wishes, it was as if all the whirlwinds above the house had ceased. They collided, the hordes of wild hunters rushed past. The posts of the house swayed, the beams bent. Trees splintered against the house like spears on a knight's breast. Inside, the people grew pale. Horror seized upon them, but they did not break their plan. At dawn, they began its execution. The morning was beautiful and bright. Thunderstorms and witchcraft had vanished. The axes cut even sharper than usual. The ground was loose, and every beech tree fell exactly as one would have wished. No wagon broke down, the cattle were willing and strong, and the people were protected from every accident as if by an unseen hand. Only one thing was strange. Below Sumiswald, there was still no road leading to the far valley, but there was still a swamp there, irrigated by the unruly Green River. One had to drive up the hill through the village past the church. As in days gone by, they always traveled in 3 trains at a time, so they could help each other with advice, strength, and livestock. Now they only had to travel through Sumiswald, past the churchyard outside the village where a small chapel stood. Below it on the level path, they had to lay down the beech trees. As soon as they were on the churchyard and approaching the church on level ground, the weight of the wagons didn't get lighter, but heavier and heavier. They had to hitch up as many animals as they had to beat them mercilessly, had to put their own hands on the spokes, and even the gentlest horses shied, as if something invisible had come from them. The churchyard stood in their way, and a dull bell tone, almost like the stray sound of a distant. The tolling of the church bell was so loud that it filled even the strongest men with a peculiar dread. And every time one approached the church, people and animals trembled. Once past it, one could drive calmly, unload calmly, and return calmly with a fresh load. 6 beech trees were unloaded side by side that same day at the agreed upon spot. The following morning, 6 beech trees were planted at Barhagen, and throughout the entire valley, no one heard an axle churn around its spool. No one heard the usual shouts of the carters, the neighing of the horses, or the monotonous bellowing of the oxen. But 6 beech trees stood at the top, which anyone who wanted to could see, and they were the 6 beech trees. They had been laid down by the stalk and no others. There was great astonishment throughout the valley, and curiosity arose in everyone. The knights in particular wondered what least the peasants had agreed upon, and how the beech trees were brought to the site. They would gladly have extracted the secret from the peasants in a pagan manner, but they soon saw that the peasants didn't know everything either, as they themselves were somewhat frightened. Moreover, von Stolfel objected. He was not only indifferent to how the beech trees were brought to Barhagen. On the contrary, as long as the beech trees were brought there, he was pleased to see that the peasants were spared. He had clearly seen that the knight's mockery had led him to act rashly, for if the peasants perished and the fields were lost, if they remained unappointed, the ruler suffered the greatest damage. But what von Stolfen had once said remained unchanged. The relief the peasants had gained suited him perfectly, and he was entirely indifferent as to whether they sold their souls for it. For what did he care about the peasants' souls once death had taken their bodies? He now laughed at his knights and protected the peasants from their recklessness. The peasants, however, wanted to investigate the matter, and sent squires to guard them. These were found half dead in ditches next morning, where an unseen hand had thrown them. Then 2 knights went to Barhagen, where they were bold warriors, and wherever there was a risk to be in the heathen land, they had overcome it. In the morning, they were found frozen on the ground. When they were able to speak again, they said that a red knight with a fiery lance had run them down. Here and there, a curious woman could not resist peeking through a crack or opening at the road in the valley when it was midnight. Immediately, a poisonous wind would blow upon her. Her face would swell up, and for weeks neither nose nor eyes could be seen, her mouth found with difficulty. The people lost their desire to spy, and no one looked down in the valley again when midnight passed, which was located there. Once, however, a man was suddenly overcome by death. He needed final comfort, but no one was allowed to fetch the priest, for midnight was near, and the road led past the Kiltstelden. Then an innocent little boy, dear to God and man, ran out of fear for his father towards the unnamed Sumiswald. Then he came to Kiltstelden. He saw beech trees rising from the ground, each drawn by 2 fiery squirrels, and beside them, riding on a black goat, he saw a green man, a fiery hostage. He held it in his hand, a fiery beard on his face, and a fiery red feather swung from his hat. Thus the procession traveled high through the air, far beyond the horizons, and swift as an instant. The boy saw this, and no one harmed him. Not even 3 weeks had passed when the 90 beech trees on Barhargen stood, forming a beautiful shaded walk, for all were sprouting lushly, not a single one withered. But the knights and also von Stolfen did not often venture there, for a secret horror always lingered. They would have preferred to know nothing more of the matter. But none put an end to it, each comforting himself. If it failed, then the other would bear the blame. But the farmers were pleased with each beech tree that was up, and with each beech tree grew the hope of satisfying the Lord, of deceiving the green. He had no pledge, and once the 100th tree was up, what more could they ask the green? Meanwhile, they were still not certain every day. They feared he was playing a trick on them and would abandon them. On St. Urban's Day, they brought him the last beech trees at the churchyard, and young and old slept till little that night. It was almost unbelievable that he could finish the work without any trouble, without a child or pledge. The following morning, long before the sun, old and young were up and about, all of them feeling the same curious fear. But for a long time, no one dared to go to the place where the beech trees lay. They did not know if there was a trap there for those who wanted to cheat the green. A wild cowherd boy who had brought cheese from the Alp finally dared to jump ahead and found no more beech trees, and no trickster was to be found in the clearing. They still didn't trust the game. The cowherd boy had to go ahead of them to Barhagen. There, everything was in order. 100 beech trees stood in neat rows. None were withered. None of them had a runny face. None of them ached. Then jubilation rose high in their hearts, and much scorn flowed against the green and against the knights. For the third time, they sent the wild cowherd boy, and had it said to von Stolfen. Everything was now in order at Barhagen. He should come and count the beech trees, but he became apprehensive, and had it said to them that they should make sure they came home. He would gladly have told them to clear away the entire shadowy passage again, but he didn't for the sake of his knights. So it wouldn't be said that he was afraid, but he didn't know about the peasants' rent and who might interfere in the business. When the cowherd's boy brought the news, hearts swelled even more defiantly. The wild youth danced in the shadowy passage. Wild yodeling echoed from ravine to ravine, from mountain to mountain, reverberating off the walls of Summerswald Castle. Thoughtful old men warned and pleaded, but defiant hearts heed not the warnings of thoughtful old men. When misfortune strikes, it is said that the old men, with their hesitancy and warnings, brought it upon themselves. This time has not yet come when it is recognized that defiance conjures misfortune from the ground. Jubilation spread over hill and dale to every house, and wherever there was still wherever meat hung in the smoke, as long as a finger it was cooked, and wherever there was still a handful of butter in the harbor, it was cooked. The meat was eaten, the cakes disappeared, the day was over, and another day rose in the sky. The day drew ever nearer on which a woman was to bear a child, and the nearer the day came, the more urgent the fear became. The green would announce himself again, demand what was his, or lay a trap for them. Who can fathom the misery of that young woman who was to bear the child? Throughout the whole house it echoed again, gradually seizing every member of the household, and no one knew what to do except that he with whom one had consorted was not to be trusted. The nearer the fateful hour came, the closer the poor woman pressed herself to God, clinging not only with her arms, but with body and soul, with all her heart, begging the Holy Mother for protection for the. This belief also arose among the others, and the plight of the young woman touched their hearts, but they were reluctant to confess their pact with Satan to the priest, and no one had gone to confession since, and no one had spoken to him. He was a very pious man. Even the knights of the castle did not trifle with him, for he told them the truth. Once the matter was settled, he could no longer prevent it. The peasants had thought, but now no one was willing to be the first to report it to him. Their conscience probably told them why. Finally, a woman's heart was overcome with misery. She ran and revealed the situation and the poor woman's wish to the priest. The pious man was greatly alarmed, but he did not waste time with empty words. Boldly he entered the fray for the poor, soul against the mighty adversary. He was one of those who do not shy away from the hardest fight, because they wish to be crowned with the crown of eternal life, and because they know full well that no one will be crowned unless they fight righteously. Around the house where the woman awaited her hour, he cast a sacred vow, consecrated water, which evil spirits must not cross. He blessed the threshold, the whole room, and the woman peacefully gave birth, and the priest baptized the child undisturbed. Peace reigned outside as well. The bright stars twinkled in the clear sky, and the gentle breezes stirred in the trees. Some claimed to have heard a wailing laugh from afar. Others, however, thought it was only the owls at the edge of the woods. But everyone who was there was extremely happy, and all had disappeared forever as they thought. If they led the green ones, if they had led the green ones once, they could always do it with the same means. A great feast was prepared, and guests were summoned from afar. In vain did the Lord's priest admonish them against revelry and jubilation, urging them to tremble and to pray, for the enemy was not yet defeated, nor God atoned. It was in his mind as if he could not impose any penance upon them for atonement, as if a great and heavy penance drew near from God's own hand. But they did not listen to him. They wanted to satisfy him with food and drink. He, however, went away sorrowfully, praying for those who did not know what they were doing, and prepared himself to fight with prayer and fasting, like a faithful shepherd for the entrusted herd. Christine sat amidst the jubilant revelers, but strangely still, with glowing cheeks and dark eyes. A strange twitching could be seen in her face. Christine had been present at the birth as an experienced midwife, and had stood as godmother at the sudden baptism with a bold heart and without fear. But when the priest sprinkled the water over the child and baptized it in the three highest names, it was as if a fiery iron were suddenly pressed upon the spot where she had received the green's kiss. In sudden terror she recoiled. The child almost fell to the ground, and since then the pain did not lessen but grew more intense with each passing hour. At first she sat silently, suppressing the pain and secretly mulling over the heavy thoughts in her awakened soul, but more and more frequently she ran her hand to the burning spot on which a poisonous wasp seemed to be sitting, piercing her with marrow with a red-hot stinger. When no wasp could be shooed away, the stings grew even hotter, the thoughts even more dreadful. Christine began to show her cheek to ask what she saw there, and again Christine asked, but no one saw anything, and soon no one wanted to shorten their pleasure by peering at cheeks any longer. Finally, she was able to ask an old woman just as the rooster crowed. Dawn was breaking. The old woman saw an almost invisible mark on Christine's cheek. It was nothing, said the old woman. It would soon go away, and went on her way. And Christine wanted to comfort herself, thinking it was nothing, and would soon pass, but the pain did not lessen, and imperceptibly the small spot grew, and everyone saw it and asked her, what was that blackness on her face? They thought nothing of it, but the words pierced her heart like stabs, awakening the heavy thoughts again and again and again. She had to think that the green had kissed her on the same spot, and that the same fire, which then had flashed through her bones like lightning, now burned and consumed them. Thus sleep left her. Food tasted like firebrand to her. Relentlessly she ran here and there, seeking comfort, and found none, for the pain was still growing, and the black spot was getting bigger and blacker. The individual dark streaks ran out from it, and towards the mouth a bump seemed to be forming on the round spot. So Christine suffered and ran along many a long day and many a long night, and had no one to give the anguish of her heart was revealed, and what she could obtain from the greenery in this place. But if she had known that she could be rid of this torment, she would have sacrificed everything in heaven and earth. She was by nature a presumptuous woman, but not completely wild with rage and pain. Then it happened that another woman was expecting a child. This time the fear was not great. The people were cheerful, and as soon as they provided for the priest in due time, they thought they could mock the green. Only Christine was not so. The nearer the day of the birth came, the nearer the day of the birth came, the more terrible the burning on her cheek became. The more powerfully the black spot extended. Distinct legs stretched out from it. Ugh. Short hair sprouted. Shining spots and stripes appeared on its back. And the hump became a head, and from it flashed a shining poisonous flash as from two eyes. Ew! Everyone cried out loudly when they saw the poisonous garden spider. They looked at Christine's face, and full of fear and horror they fled when they saw how firmly it sat within her face, growing out of it. The people spoke of all sorts of things. One advised this, another advised that, but all wished Christine well, whatever it might be, and avoided her and fled whenever possible. Ugh, so gross. The more the people fled, the more Christine pursued them. She went from house to house. She felt the double reminding her of the promised child, and to persuade the people to accept the sacrifice with unequivocal words, she pursued them in hellish anguish. But that concerned the others little. When Christine's suffering did not hurt them, what she suffered in her opinion had made her feel guilty. And because they could no longer escape her, they said to her, "See to it. No one promised a child, therefore no one will give one." With furious words, she turned to her own husband. He fled like the others, and when he could no longer flee, he coldly told Christine that it would get better, that it was a mark, like so many others had, and that once it had grown out, the pain would cease and it would be easy to bandage it. Meanwhile, the pain did not cease. Each leg became a hellfire. The spider's body hell itself, and when the woman's awaited hour came, Christine felt as if a sea of fire surrounded her, as if fiery knives were digging into her marrow, as if fiery whirlwinds were raging through her brain. The spider, however, swelled up, reared up, and its poisonous eyes bulged from between its short bristles. When Christine, in her burning agony, found no sympathy anywhere, no one, the writhing one was well guarded. She tumbled like a whirlwind among the path the priest was bound to take. With swift steps he came along the slope, accompanied by the sturdy sexton. The hot sun and the steep path did not slow his pace, for there was a soul to save, an immeasurable misfortune to avert. And coming from a distant sick place, the priest feared terrible delay. In despair, Christine threw herself in his path, embraced his knees, begged for deliverance from her hell, but the sacrifice of the child, who knew no life yet, and the spiders swelled even higher, glittering terribly black in Christine's reddened face, and with ghastly eyes it stared at the priest's holy the instruments and signs, but he quickly pushed Christine aside and struck the holy sign. He clearly saw the enemy, but he abandoned the fight to save a soul. Christine, however, jumped up, rushed after him, and tried everything but the sacristan's strong hand held the enraged woman back from the priest, and in time he was able to protect the house. Christine, however, jumped up, rushed after him, and tried everything but the sacristan's hand held the enraged woman back from the priest, and in time he was able to protect the house. Receive the child into consecrated hands and place it in the hands of him whom hell can never overcome. Outside, meanwhile, Christine had fought a terrible battle. She wanted the unbaptized child in her hands, wanted to enter the house, but strong men held her back. Gusts of wind battered the house. Pale lightning flickered around it, but the hand of the Lord was over it. The child was baptized, and Christine circled the house in vain and powerless. Seized by an even wilder torments of hell, she uttered sounds that were unlike the sounds of a human breast. The cattle trembled in their stalls and broke free from their ropes. The oaks in the forest rustled, terrified. Inside the house, jubilation began over the new victory, the green's powerlessness, his henchman's futile struggle. Outside, however, Christine lay thrown to the ground in terrible pain, and in her fiery face, pains began to churn, such as no woman in childbirth on earth had ever experienced, and the spider in her face swelled even higher and burned ever more intensely through her bones. Then Christine felt as if her face had suddenly burst, as if glowing coals were born within it, coming to life, grimacing all over her face, all over her limbs, as everything about her were coming alive, and grimacing fiercely over her whole body was gone. Then in the pale light of the lightning, she saw countless, long-legged, poisonous black spiders running over her limbs out into the night, and countless others, also long-legged and poisonous, following the vanished ones. Finally, she saw none following the former ones. The burning in her face subsided. The spider lay down, becoming an almost invisible point again, and looked with extinguished eyes after the hellish brood she had borne and sent forth as a sign, how the green one let himself to be trifled with. Deliberated like a woman in childbirth, Christine kept home, though the heat no longer burned so fiercely in her face. The fire in her heart had not diminished. Through her weary limbs, though her weary limbs longed for rest, the green gave her no rest. Once he has him, he does it to him. Inside the house, however, they rejoiced and celebrated for a long time. Didn't hear the cattle bellowing and raging in the stable. Finally, they sprang up and went to investigate. Pale with fear, those who had gone returned and brought the news that the most beautiful cow lay dead, and the others raged and roared as they had never seen before. It was not right. Something extraordinary was at work. Then the jubilation died down. Everyone ran to the cattle, whose bellowing echoed over hill and dale, but no one had any advice against the spell. They tried both secular and spiritual arms, but all in vain before daybreak. Death had claimed them. All the cattle in the stable were stretched out, but as it fell silent here, bellowing began here and bellowing there. Those who were heard how distress broke into their stables as the cattle, in their terrible fear, called upon their masters for help. As if the flames were leaping from their roofs, they hurried home. But they brought no help. Here and there, death filled from the cattle, cries of woe from people, and animals filled mountains and valleys. And the sun, which so cheerfully left the valley, looked down in terrible misery. When the sun finally shone, the people saw how the stables, where the cattle had fallen, were teeming with countless black spiders. These crawled over the cattle and the fodder, and whatever they touched was poison, and whatever was alive began to rage, was soon struck down by health. No stable could be cleared of these spiders. There they were cleaning, it was as if they grew out of the ground. I couldn't protect any stable they hadn't already entered from them unseen. They crept from all the walls, falling in heaps from the floorboards. The cattle were driven to the pastures. They were driven only into the jaws of death, for as soon as a cow set foot on a pasture, the ground began to come alive. Long black spiders sprouted up. Ugh! Terrible alpine flowers crawled on the cattle, and a dreadful mournful cry sounded from the mountains down into the valley. And all these spiders looked like the spider on Christine's face. Ugh! Little children looked to their mother, and there were never any like them. Didn't see any. The cries of the poor animals had also reached the castle, and soon shepherds followed, announcing that their cattle had fallen victim to the poisonous animals. And in ever-increasing anger, von Stolfen heard how herd after herd had been lost, heard what a scam they had had with the green, how they had cheated him a second time. And the spiders were so similar to the children of the mother, the spider in the Landau woman's face, who alone had made the pact with the green, and never gave a proper account of it. Then Stolfel rode up the mountain in fierce anger and thundered at the poor people that he would not lose flock after flock. Because of them, they would have to replace what he had been harmed for, and that they would have to keep what they had promised and bear what they had done voluntarily. He would not suffer any harm because of them, or if he did, they would have to pay him 1,000-fold. They could beware, so he spoke to them unconcerned about what he demanded of them, and that he had driven them to it did not concern him, and he held them accountable for what they had done. Most had already realized that the spiders were a plague of evil, a reminder to keep the lease, and that Christine must know more about it, that she hadn't told them everything, and she'd negotiate with the green. Now they trembled again before the green, no longer laughing at him, trembling before their earthly master, and if they satisfied him, what would the spiritual master say to it? Would he permit it, and would he then have no penance for them? Thus in fear the most concerned gathered in a lonely barn, and Christine had to come and give a clear explanation of what she had actually negotiated. Christine came wild, vengeful, tortured anew by the growing spider. When she saw the men's timidity and no woman, she told Punctum what had happened to her, how the green man quickly took her at her word and gave her a kiss on the pledge, which she could no longer. Respected more than the others, the spider now grew on the very spot, amidst hellish torment. From the moment the first child was baptized, the spider, just as the second child was baptized, and the green one was fooled, bore countless spiders amid hellish torment, for he would not be fooled unpunished, as she felt in 1,000-fold death-like pains. Now the spider grows again, the torment increases, and if the next child does not become the green ones, no one will know how dreadful the encroaching plague is, how dreadful the night's revenge. So Christine told her story, and the men's hearts trembled, and for a long time no one wanted to speak. Gradually broken sounds emerged from their fear-scarred throats, and when they were pieced together, they meant exactly what Christine meant. But not a single one had agreed with her advice. Only one stood up and spoke briefly and clearly. The best thing seemed to be to strike Christine dead. Once she was dead, the green could hold on to the dead woman, and would have no further leverage over the living. Then Christine laughed wildly, kicked him in the face, and said he should strike her. She would like it, but the green wouldn't. She but at an unbaptized child, and just as he had drawn her, he could just as well draw the hand that would seize her. Then the hand of the man who had spoken alone twitched. He sat down and listened silently to the advice of the others, and breaking off where no one said anything, but each only something that was meant to mean little, they agreed to sacrifice the next child. But no one wanted to offer his hand for it. No one wanted to carry the child to the churchyard, where he had laid down beech trees for the common good, as they believed. No one was hesitant to use the devil, but no one desired to make him personal acquaintance with him. Then Christine willingly offered herself. For once who had dealings with the devil, It can do little harm a second time. They knew who was to bear the next child, but they spoke nothing of it, and the father was not present. They communicated with and without words and parted ways. The young woman who on that dreadful night when Christine brought news of the green had trembled and wept. She didn't know why at the time was now expecting her next child. The earlier events hadn't comforted or reassured her. An unspeakable fear lay upon her heart, which neither prayer nor confession could dispel. A suspicious silence seemed to encircle her. No one spoke of the spider any more. All eyes upon her seemed suspicious, as if calculating the hour when they could seize her child and appease the devil. So lonely and forsaken she felt against the uncanny power around her. She had no support but her mother-in-law, a pious woman, who stood by her. But what can an old woman do against a wild mob? She had her husband. He had promised all good things, but how he lamented for his cattle and thought so little of the poor woman's fear. The priest had promised to come as quickly and as early as he was asked. But what could happen in that instant? They sent for help until he came, and the poor woman had no more reliable messenger than her own husband, who was supposed to protect and watch over for him, and she also lived in the same house with Christine. And their husbands were brothers, and she had no relatives of her own. She had come to the house as an orphan. One can imagine the poor woman's anguish only in praying with her pious mother. Did she find some comfort, which vanished as soon as she looked into the evil eyes? Meanwhile, the illness was still there. It sustained the terror. Admittedly, only here and there did a peace fall. Only rarely did the spiders appear. But as soon as someone's terror subsided, as soon as anyone thought or said, the evil will abate of itself, and one should think carefully before sinning against a child, then Christine's hellish torment increased. The spider welled up, and whoever thought or spoke thus, death returned with new fury to its flock. The nearer the expected hour came, the more the distress seemed to increase again, and they realized it was a certain arrangement. They should have to decide how they could safely and without any fault of their own take the child. They feared the man most of all, and using force against him was against their nature. Then Christine took it upon herself to win him over, and she won him over. He didn't want to know anything about the matter, wanted to please his wife, to fetch the priest, but not to rush, and didn't want to ask what happened in his absence. So he reconciled himself to his conscience. He would make peace with God through Mass, and perhaps something could still be for the poor child's soul, he thought perhaps. If the pious priest could win it back from the devil, then they would be off the hook, having done their bit and cheated the wicked man. That's what the man thought, and in any case, whatever happened, he would bear no guilt in the whole affair, as long as he hadn't personally participated. Thus the poor woman was sold, and unaware of it, anxiously hoping for rescue, and decided in the council of men was the thrust into his heart. But what he had above had decided, that was still covered by the clouds that lie before the future. It had been a stormy year, and the harvest had come. All strength was mustered to bring the grain under the safe roof below during the clear hours. It was a hot afternoon. Black clouds stretched up over the dark mountains. Swallows fluttered anxiously round the roof, and the poor woman felt so confined and afraid, alone in the house, for even her grandmother was out in the fields, helping more than with the action. Then a sharp pain shot through her marrow and bone. Her eyes darkened. She felt her hour approaching and was alone. Fear drove her from the house. Heavily, she walked towards the fields. But soon she had to sit down. She wanted to stand her voice in the distance. She wanted to send her voice in the distance, but it wouldn't leave her constricted breasts. With her a little boy who was only just learning to use his legs, who had never been in the field on his own feet, but only in his mother's arms. The little boy had to be the poor woman's. He needed his messenger, not knowing if he would find the child, if its little legs would carry them there. But the faithful little boy saw his mother's fear, and ran and fell and got up again, and the cat chased his rabbits. Doves and chickens ran around his feet. His lamb jumped after him, kicking and playing, but the little boy saw none of this, did not delay, and faithfully delivered his message. The grandmother appeared, breathless. But the man lingered. He had only to unload the cart. They say an eternity passed. Finally he came, and another eternity. Finally he slowly set off on the long road, and in the mortal fear, the poor woman felt her hour approaching faster and faster. Christine had watched everything joyfully from the field. The sun beat down on the hard work, but the spider hardly burned at all anymore, and the next few hours seemed easy to her. She worked cheerfully and didn't hurry home, knowing how slow the messenger was. Only when the last sheaf was loaded and gusts of wind announced the approaching storm. Christine hurried to her prize, which she thought was assured, and as she went home, she waved meaningfully to many a person she met. They nodded to her, quickly carried the message home. Many a knee trembled, and many a soul longed to be at peace. She prayed involuntarily fear, but she couldn't. Inside the little room, the poor woman whimpered, and the minutes stretched into eternities, and the grandmother could not still her wailing with prayers and comforting. She had, the little room well. The door was locked and every heavy equipment placed for it. As long as they were alone in the house, it seemed to be okay. But when they saw Christine coming home, when they heard creeping steps at the door, when they heard many other footsteps and secret whispers outside, no priest appeared, no other faithful person. And as the longed-for moment drew nearer and nearer, one could imagine the fear in which the poor woman swam, as if in the boiling oil, without help and without hope. They heard Christine not leaving the door. The poor woman felt her wild sister-in-law's fiery eyes through the door, and they burned through her body and soul. Then, the first sign of life, a child whimpered through the door, suppressed as quickly as possible, but too late. The door flew open with a furious prepared thrust, and as a tiger pounces on its prey, Christine rushes upon the poor woman in childbirth. The old woman, who throws herself against the storm, falls down in holy maternal anguish. The woman in childbirth gathers herself to her feet, but her weak body collapses, and the child is in Christine's hands. A horrible scream bursts from the mother's heart. Then faintness shrouds her in black shadow. Timidation and horror gripped the men when Christine came out with the stolen child. A premonition of a grim future dawned on them, but none had the courage to stop the deed, and the fear of the devil's torments was longer than the fear of God. Only Christine did not waver. Her face shone brightly, as it does a victor's after a battle won. It seemed to her as if a spider were caressing her with a gentle itching. The lightning bolts that struck on her way too. As they flickered around Kilstelden, their joyful lights shone, the thunder a tender rumble, the vengeful storm a sweet whisper. Hans, the poor woman's husband, had kept his promise all too well. He had gone slowly on his way, thoughtfully inspecting every field, watching every bird, waiting for the fish in the brook to leap and catch mosquitoes before the approaching storm. Then he hurried onward, taking quick steps, even preparing to jump. There was something inside him that drove him on, that made the hair on his head stand on end. It was his conscience telling him that what a father deserved who betrayed his wife and child. It was the love he still had for his wife and offspring. But then something else held him back, and this was stronger than the first. It was the fear of the people, the fear of the devil, the love for what he could take from them. Then he walked more slowly again, slowly like a person taking their last walk, going to their place of execution. Perhaps it was so, for many a person does not know that they are taking their last walk. If they knew, they would not take it, or would do it differently. It was so late before he reached Sumiswald. Black clouds raced over the Moonberg. Heavy drops fell, scorched in the dust, and the little bell in the tower began to toll dully, reminding the people to think of God and pray that he would not let his storm be judgment upon them. The priest stood before his house, prepared for any eventuality, so that he would be ready when his Lord, who was above his head, came. He went to a dying man, a burning house, or wherever else he was called. When he saw Hans coming, he recognized the call to the arduous journey, gathered up his robes, and sent a message to his ringing sexton to let himself be relieved of the bell rope and join his escort. Meanwhile, he offered Hans a refreshing drink, so beneficial after a brisk run in the sweltered air, which Hans did not need. The priest did not suspect the man's treachery. Deliberately, Hans refreshed himself. Reluctantly, the sexton arrived and gladly partook of the drink Hans offered him. The priest stood before them armed, disdaining any drink he did not need for such a journey and struggle. He was reluctant to let them leave the jug he had set out, reluctant to infringe upon the guest's rights. But he knew a right that was higher than the guest's right, and the reluctance to drink filled him with anger. He was ready, he said finally. A troubled woman awaited him, and a terrible deed lay before him. And between the woman and the deed he must stand with holy weapons. Therefore they should not delay, but come, for they would surely be something above, for him who had not quenched his thirst down here. Then Hans, the waiting woman's husband, spoke. There is no great hurry with his wife, everything is difficult. And immediately a flash of lightning engulfed the room, blinding everyone, and a thunderclap broke loose above the house, so that every post in the house, every member of the house trembled. Then the Sergrist, as he finished his benediction, listened to what it's like outside, and heaven itself has confirmed what Hans said, that we should wait, and what good would it do if we had gone? We would never get up there alive, and he himself has said that he wasn't in such a hurry with his wife. And indeed, the thunderstorm came raging, the likes of which one rarely experiences in human memory. From every ravine and valley it stormed forth, storming from all sides, driven by all winds. All together over Soma swelled, and every cloud became an army, and one cloud charged at another, and one cloud trying to kill the other, and a battle of clouds began, and the storm raged, and lightning was unleashed, and lightning after lightning struck the earth, as if they were trying to carve a path through the earth's center to the other side. Without ceasing, the thunder roared. The storm howled angrily. The cloud's bosom was bursting open. Floods plunged down, but for the sake of his companions he hesitated. When the battle of the clouds broke out so suddenly and violently, the priest had not answered the sacristan, nor sat down. An ever-increasing anxiety seized him. An urge came upon him to plunge forth into the raging elements. Then it seemed to him as if he heard, through the thunder's terrible voice, a woman's marrow-slicing cry of woe. The thunder suddenly became to him God's terrible rebuke. For his delay he set out, whatever the other two might say. He stepped out, prepared for anything, into the fiery weather, into the storm's fury. The flood of clouds, slowly, reluctantly, the two followed him. It roared and thundered, as if these sounds were about to melt together into the final trumpet that would announce the end of the world, and the fiery sheaves fell over the village as if every hut were about to burst into flames. But the servant of him who gives voice to the thunder, and has lightning as his servants, has no need to follow this, has lightning as his servant, has no need to fear this fellow servant of the same master, and whoever walks within God's ways can confidently entrust his will to God's storms. Therefore the priest strode fearlessly through the storms toward the churchyard, but the others did not follow him with the same courage, for their hearts were not in the same place. They did not want to leave the churchyard, not in such weather, not at such a late night, and Hans had a particular reason why he did not want to. They begged the priest to turn back, to take other paths. Hans knew closer, the sexton better, both warned of the waters in the valley, the swollen green ones, but the priest did not listen, heeded their words. Driven by a wondrous urge, he hastened on the wings of prayer to the churchyard, his foot stumbling, no stone, his eye blinded by no lightning, trembling and far behind him, covered, as they thought, by the holiest thing that the priest himself wore. Hans and the sexton followed him, but when they came out before the village, where Stalden slopes down into the valley, the priest suddenly stood still and shielded his eyes with his hand. Below the chapel, a red feather shimmered in the lightning flash, and the priest's sharp eye saw a black head emerging from the green hedges, and on it the red feather wavered, and as he gazed a little longer, he saw on the far side of the slope a wild figure flying swiftly, as if driven by the wind's wildest thrust, toward the dark head on which the red feather waved like a banner. Then the holy battle seized up in the priest, the battle that, sensing evil, comes upon those whose hearts are consecrated to God, as the sprout comes upon the seed when life penetrates it, as it penetrates the flower when it is to unfold, as it comes from the hero when his enemy raises his sword, and as the thirsty one into the cool waters of the stream. As the hero to battle, the priest hurled down the grove, rushed into the boldest fight, pressed between the Greens and Christine, who were just about to place the child in the other's arms, right into their midst, and between them he hurled the three highest holy names. Holding the most holy, the green one splashed holy water over the child and hits Christine at the same time. Then with a terrible howl of woe, the green one flees. Like a fiery red streak, he jerks away until the earth swallows him. Touched by the consecrated water, Christine shrinks with a horrific hiss like wool and fire, like lime and water, shrinking, hissing, spouting flames, until only the black, highly swollen, gruesome spider remains in her face. Shrinking with it, hissing into it, and it now sits defiantly, bristling with venom. It lay right in the middle of the child, and glared angry looks from its eyes at the priest. He splashed holy water at it. It hissed like ordinary water on a hot stone. The spider grew ever larger, stretched its black legs ever further over the child, glared ever more venomously at the priest. Then, in fiery religious fury, he grasped it with a bold hand. It was as if he were grasping onto glowing stingers, but unwaveringly he gripped it firmly, hurling the Get rid of the vermin, grab the child, and hurry with it to the mother in the meantime. And as his battle was over, the battle of the clouds also subsided. They hurried back to their dark chambers. Soon the valley in which the wildest battle had raged shortly before shimmered in silent starlight, and almost breathless, the priest reached the house in which sacrilege had been committed against mother and child. The mother was still unconscious there, and her piercing cry she had sent her life away. Beside her sat the old woman praying, though still placing her trust in God. He was more powerful than the evil devil. With the child, the priest also brought the mother back to life. When she awoke and saw the child again, a joy flowed through her, such as only the angels in heaven knew. No, and in the mother's arms, the priest baptized the child in the name of God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And now it was forever freed from the devil's power until it willingly surrendered itself to him. But God protected it from this into whose power its soul was now surrendered, while its body remained poisoned by the spider. Soon this soul departed again, and his bodice was marked as if with burn marks. The poor mother wept, but each part returns to where it belongs, the soul to God, the body to earth. Their comfort is found sooner or later. As soon as the priest had performed his holy office, he began to feel a strange itching in his hand and arm, at which he flung the spider away. He saw small black spots on his hand which visibly grew larger and swelled up. A deathly shiver ran through his heart. He blessed the woman and hurried home as a faithful warrior. He wanted to return the sacred weapons to where they belonged, so that they might be at the hand of another after him. His arms swelled high, black boils grew ever higher. He fought with death's weariness, but he did not succumb to it. When he came to kill Stalden, he saw Hans, the godless father, whose whereabouts were unknown, lying on his back in the middle of the path. His face was swollen and burning black, and right in the middle of it sat a large, black, and gruesome spider. When the priest came, it puffed itself up. The hairs on its back bristled venomously. Its eyes glared at him, venomous and spraying, acting like a cat preparing to pounce on its mortal enemy's face. Then the priest began a good incantation and raised his holy weapons, and the spider shuddered, crawled long-legged from its black face. Lost he lay in hissing grass. Then the priest went home, completely placed the blessed sacrament in its place, and while wild pains tore his body to death, his soul waited in sweet peace for its God, for whom they had rightly fought in the bold battles with God, and God did not let them wait long. But with such peace, quietly waiting for the Lord, was not in the back of the valley, nor was it up on the mountains. For the moment Christine rode down the mountain with the stolen child towards the devil, utter terror gripped every heart. During the terrible storm, people trembled in their terror of death, for their hearts knew that if God's hand came upon them with destruction, it would be more than deserved. When the storm had passed, the news spread from house to house that the pastor had brought the child back and baptized it, but neither Hans nor Christine had been seen. The dawning morning found nothing but pale faces, and the beautiful sun did not change their color, for everyone knew that the terrible thing was yet to come. Then it was heard that the pastor had died with black boils. Hans was found with a horrible face, and strangely confused words were heard from the hideous spider, which had been transformed into Christine. It was a beautiful harvest day, but not a hand stirred to work. The people gathered together, as is their custom the day after a great misfortune. Only now, in their trembling hands, did they truly feel what it meant to try to bury their way out of earthly hardship and torment with an immortal soul. They felt that there was a God in heaven who could terribly avenge all the injustice done to poor children, and who could not defend themselves, so they stood trembling together, lamenting, and whoever was with the others was not allowed to go home yet, and there was strife and contention among them, and one blamed the other, and everyone wanted to be admonished and warned, and no one could object to the fact that punishment should befall the guilty. Everyone wanted to meet themselves in their house without punishment, and if in this terrible waiting and strife they had known of no new innocent victim, there would have been no one who did not commit a crime against it, hoping to save themselves. Then in the middle of the crowd, one man cried out terribly. It was as if he had stepped on a burning thorn, as if his foot were being nailed to the ground with a red-hot nail, as if fire were flowing through the marrow of his eyes. The crowd scattered, and all the eyes looked up toward the foot forward which the screaming man's hand was thrust. But on the foot sat the large black spider, staring venomously and maliciously all around. At first everyone's blood ran cold, their eyes caught in their chests. Their breath caught in their chest, their eyes glazed over, and calmly, maliciously, the spider stared about, and the foot turned black, and inside it was as if a fire were fighting, hissing, and fiercely with water. The fear, the chains of terror broke, the crowd scattered. But with wondrous swiftness, the spider had abandoned its first perch and crawled over this person's foot and another's heel, and fire surged through its body, and its horrible scream drove the fleeing people even more furiously. In the blink of an eye, immortal terror like ghastly game before the wild hunt, they rushed to their huts, and each one thought the spider was behind him, barred the door, and yet did not cease to tremble in unspeakable fear. And one day the spider was gone. No new death was heard. The people had to leave their boarded-up houses, had to search for food for their livestock and for themselves. They did so in mortal fear, for where the spider now could be. For where was the spider, and could it not be here and suddenly sit on their foot? And whoever helped most consciously and peered most sharply suddenly saw the spider sitting on their hand or foot. It ran across their face, sat black and long on their nose, and stared into its eyes. Fiery spires burrowed into its bones. The fires of hell engulfed him until death stretched him out. So the spider was somewhere, sometimes nowhere, sometimes here, sometimes there. Sometimes down the valley, sometimes up in the mountains. It hissed through the grass. It fell from the ceiling. It emerged from the ground. At broad daylight, when people sat round their porridge, it appeared staring at the bottom of the table, and before the people had even scattered its terror, it had run over everyone's hands, sat at the top of the table on the head of the household, and stared over the table, over the blackening hands. At night it fell into people's faces, met them in the woods, sought them out at home in the stable. The people could not avoid it. It was nowhere and everywhere. They could not protect themselves from it while awake, nor were they safe from it while sleeping. When they felt safest under the open sky, on a treetop, fire crept up their backs. They felt the spider's fiery feet on their necks. They stared over their shoulders, the child in the cradle, the old man on his deathbed. It spared neither. It was a death such as no one had ever known, and dying from it was more terrible than anyone had ever experienced. A more terrible even than dying was the nameless fear of the spider, which was everywhere and nowhere, which, when one felt safest, suddenly stared into my eyes in a deadly way. The news of these horrors had naturally reached the castle immediately, and had brought terror and strife as well, insofar as it could occur within the rules of the order. The following appears to be unrelated and possibly a separate text fragment, that of Stolfine. It frightened him that they too might be afflicted in the same way as his cattle had been, and that the deceased priest had said many things that now stirred his soul. His knights told him that all the suffering he inflicted on the peasants would return to him, but he had never believed it, because he thought God would know him to distinguish him between a knight and a peasant. Otherwise, he would not have created them so differently. But now he was indeed afraid that things would go according to the priest's word. So he spoke harshly to his knights, and thought that severe punishment was now coming for their careless words. The knights, however, also refused to take the blame, and one blamed another. Even if no one said so, they all believed that it really only concerned von Stolfen, for if one were to take it seriously, he was to blame for everything. And beside him they looked at a young Polish knight, who had actually spoken the most frivolous words about the castle, and had most incited von Stolfen to the new construction in the Abbey's shadow walk. He was still very young, but the wildest of them all, and when the daring deed was involved, he was in the lead. He was like a heathen and feared neither God nor the devil. He sensed what the others meant, but weren't allowed to say to him, and it also sensed their secret fear. Therefore he mocked them, saying if they were afraid of a spider, what could they possibly do against a dragon? Then he armed himself well and rode up into the valley, daring not to return until his thrust had struck down the spider and his fist had crushed it. Wild dogs jumped around him. The falcon, he sat on his fist, the lance hung from the saddle, the horse reared merrily, half gleeful, half fearful. One saw him ride out of the castle, and remembered the night watch at Barhagen, where the place of worldly weapons against his enemy had proven so poor. He rode along the edge of the fir forest toward the nearest farmstead, his eyes scanning all around him and above him. When he saw the house, the people around it, he called to the dogs, Fred the falcon's head, and the dagger clinked loosely in its scabbard. As the falcon turned its blinded eyes toward the knight, awaiting his signal, it leapt from its fist and shot into the air. The dogs, which had sprung up, howled and fled with their tails between their legs. In vain the knight rode and called. He never saw his animals again. Then he rode towards the people, wanting to gather information. They stood by until he drew near. Then they cried out horribly and fled into the woods and ravines, for on the knight's helmet sat a black spider supernatural size, staring venomously and maliciously at the land. What it sought the knight carried without knowing it. In burning rage he shouted and rode after the people, shouting ever more fiercely, riding ever more madly, roaring ever more terrifyingly, until he and his horse plunged down a cliff into the valley below. There his helmet and body were found, and through the helmet the spider's feet had burned their way into the knight's brain, igniting the most dreadful fire within him until he met his death. Then the real terror entered the castle. They locked themselves in, yet still did not feel safe. They sought spiritual weapons, but for a long time found no one who knew how and dared to wield them. Finally, a distant priest was lured with money and words. He came and intended to set out with holy water and holy incantations against the evil enemy. But he did not strengthen himself with prayer and fasting. Instead, he feasted early in the morning with the knights, and did not count the cups, and lived well on venison and bear. In between, he talked much of his spiritual heroic deeds, and the knights their worldly ones, and the cups were not counted, and the spider was forgotten. Then all life suddenly ceased. Hands held frozen cups or forks, mouths remained open, and all eyes were fixed on only one point. Only on Van Stulfen drank the cup dry and recounted a heroic deed in pagan lands. But on his head sat a large spider, staring around the knight's table, and the knight did not feel it. Then the heat began to flow through his body in blood. He screamed horribly, flung his hand towards his head, but the spider was no longer there. Having in its terrible speed run over the faces of all the knights, none could stop it. One after another screamed, consumed by the heat, and the priest's bald head, it stared down into the heart, and with the cup which would not leave his hand. The priest tried to extinguish the fire, which blazed from his head down to marrow and bone, but the spider defied his weapon, and stared down from its throne at the horrors until the last knight uttered his last cry, dying on his last breath. Only a few servants were spared in the castle. Those who never mocked the peasants, they told how terrible it had been. The feeling that the knights had received their just deserts did not comfort the peasants, however. The terror grew ever greater, more gruesome. Many tried to flee. Some wanted to leave the valley, but they were precisely the ones who fell prey to the spider. Their corpses were found on the road. Others fled to the high mountains, but the spider was up there before them. And when they thought they were safe, the spider was sitting on their necks or faces. The monster grew ever more malicious, ever more devilish. It no longer surprised unexpectedly, no longer suddenly branded death. It sat before people in the grass, hung above them in the trees, and stared at them venomously. Then the man fled as far as his feet would carry him, and he stood breathless and still. The spider sat before him, glaring venomously at him. If he fled again and again, he had to slow steps. It sat before him once more, as if he could no longer flee. Then it slowly crept up to him and killed him. Many a man in despair tried to resist, to see if the spider could be killed. He threw 100-weight stones at it when it sat before him in the grass, and struck at it with clubs and axes, but all was in vain. The heaviest stone could not crush her. The sharpest axe would not wound her. Suddenly she was sitting on the man's face. Unharmed, she crept toward him. Flight, resistance, all was futile. Then all hope vanished, and despair filled the valley, sat upon the mountains. The beast had spared only one house until then, had never appeared in it. It was the house in which Christine lived, from which she stole the child. She had attacked her own husband in a lonely pasture. There his body was found horribly mutilated like no other, his features torn apart in unspeakable pain. On him she had unleashed her most terrible wrath, prepared the most terrible reunion for her husband, but no one saw how it happened. She had not yet come home. Whether she wanted to save it until the last minute, or whether she was afraid of it, one could not guess. But fear had taken hold there no less than in other places. The pious woman had recovered, and she did not hesitate for herself, but worried greatly about her faithful little boy and his sister, watching over them day and night. And the faithful grandmother shared her worries and watch. And together they prayed to God that he would keep their eyes open for vigilance, and he would enlighten and strengthen them for the rescue of the innocent children. Often when they stayed awake through long nights, it seemed to them as if they saw the spider glimmering and glittering in the dark corner, as if it were peering in through and at the window. Then their fear grew great, for they knew no way to protect the children from the spider, and all the more fervently they prayed to God for his advice and help. They had laid out all sorts of weapons, but when they heard the stone lost its weight, the axe's sharpness, they put them aside. Then it became ever clearer to the mother, ever more vividly in her mind. If someone dared to grasp the spider with their hand, they would want to overpower it. She also heard of people tried to crush her with her hands, when the stone proved useless but in vain. A terrible stream of heat, which surged through her hand and arm, extinguished all her strength and brought death to her heart. It also seemed to her that she could not crush the spider, but she could certainly grasp it, and God would grant her enough strength to put it somewhere to render it harmless. She had often heard how skilled men had imprisoned spirits in a hole in rock or wood, which they had plunged with a nail. As long as no one pulled the nail out, the spirit would be bound in the hole. The spirit urged her evermore to try the same thing. She drilled a hole in the bystalactite that lay closest in her hand when she sat by the cradle, prepared a peg that fit snugly into the hole, consecrated it with holy water, laid out a hammer, and now prayed day and night to God for strength to do it. But sometimes her flesh was stronger than her spirit, and heavy sleep pressed her eyes shut, and she saw the spider in her dream, staring at her little boy's golden curls. Then she sprang from the dream, drove towards the boy's curls, but there was no spider there. A smile sat on his little face, as if children smile when they see their angel in a dream. But the mother saw the spider's poisonous eyes glittering at every corner, and sleep long withered from her. Once, after a vigorous watch, sleep overcame her, and it enveloped her in thick darkness. Then it seemed to her as if the pious priest who had died saving her child rushed forth from its widest spaces and called from afar, "Woman, awake, thy enemy is here." 3 times he called so, and only on the 3rd time did she struggle from the tight bonds of sleep. But as she laboriously lifted her heavy eyelids, she saw slowly, swollen with poison, the spider stride up over her little bed towards the face of her child. Then she thought of God and swiftly seized the spider. Then streams of fire shot out from it through the faithful mother's hand and arm, right into her heart. But maternal joy and maternal love pressed her hand shut, and God gave her the strength to endure. Exerting excruciating pain, she pressed the spider into the prepared hole with one hand, placed the peg in front of it with the other, and hammered it in place. Inside it roared and raged, as if the whirlwinds were fighting with the sea. The house shook in its foundations, but the cone sat firmly, and the spider remained trapped. The faithful mother rejoiced that her child was saved, thanked God for his grace. Then she too died the same death as all, but her maternal faithfulness extinguished the pain, and the angels led her soul to God's throne, where all heroes are who risk their lives for others, for God and their people. Now the Black Death was over. Peace and life returned to the valley. The black spider was no longer seen at the time, for it sat trapped in that hole where it still sits now. "What, there in that black wood?" cried the godmother, and jumped up from the floor in a flash, as if she had been sitting in an anthill. She had been sitting by that wood in the parlor, and now she was burning. Her back she turned, she looked behind her, ran her hand up and down, and couldn't shake the fear. The black spider was sitting on her neck. The others' hearts were also tight when the grandfather remained silent. A fearful silence fell over them. No one dared to mock, nor readily agree with the cause. Everyone preferred to listen to the first word of the other, so that they could adjust their own speech according, thus minimizing the risk of making a mistake. Then the midwife, who had already called several times without an answer, came running, her face burning bright red, as if the spider had been crawling all over it. She began to grumble that no one wanted to come, no matter how loudly she called. "That's a strange thing to me," she said. "When the cooking is done, no one wants to come to the table, and then when everything isn't good anymore, she's supposed to be to blame for everything. She knows how it goes. No one can eat such fatty meat as is left inside when it gets cold. Besides, it's quite unhealthy." Now the people did come, but very slowly, and no one wanted to be the first at the door. Grandfather had to go first. This time it wasn't the usual custom of not wanting to appear impatient to eat, but rather the hesitancy that seizes everyone standing at the entrance of a dreadful place. And yet inside there was nothing dreadful. Bright, gleaming, freshly filled, the beautiful wine bottles shone on the table. 2 gleaming hams were displayed. Enormous roasts of veal, a mutton steamed, fresh braided loaves lay among them. Plates of tarts, plates with 3 kinds of pastries, were squeezed in between them, and the teapots of sweet tea were also present. It was a lovely sight, and yet no one paid much attention to it, but everyone looked around anxiously, wondering if the spider might be glittering from some corner, or even staring down at them with its poisonous eyes from the magnificent ham. No one saw it anywhere, and yet no one made the usual compliments. What was one thinking, setting out so much? Who was supposed to eat it all? There was already more than enough, but everyone crowded to the lower corners of the table. No one wanted to go up. In vain they urged the guests upwards and pointed to the empty seats. They stood below as if nailed to the spot. In vain did the man who had just given birth pour drinks and had called out that they should come and be well. The drinks were poured. Then he took the godmother by the arm and said, "Be the wittiest one and set an example." But with all her strength, and it was no small feat, the godmother resisted and cried, "Not for £1,000 would I sit up there again. My back itches up and down, as if someone were leading it around with nettles. As if I were sitting there in front of the bystall, I would feel this terrible spider clawed on my neck." "It's all your fault, grandfather," said grandmother. "Why do you bring such things up? Such things do not do any good these days, and they can damage the whole house. And when the children come home from school crying and complain that the other children accuse their grandmother of being a witch and banished to the bystall, then you'll have it." "Be quiet, grandmother," said grandfather. "These days everything is quickly forgotten, and nothing is remembered for long as it once was. They wanted the matter from me, and it is better for people to hear the truth outright than to invent something themselves. The truth brings no dishonor to our house. But come and sit. See, I will myself sit before the cone, for I have already sat there for many thousands of days, without fear and without trepidation, and therefore also without danger. Only when evil thoughts arose within me, thoughts that could give the devil a hand, did I feel as if I heard a purring behind me, like a cat purrs when you start playing with it, stroking its fur and making it feel comfortable, and a strange and peculiar sensation ran down my spine. Otherwise, it remains perfectly still inside. As long as one doesn't forget God out here on the outside, it must wait there inside." Then the guests mustered their courage and sat down, but no one came too close to the grandfather. Now at last the man who had just given birth could take the lead, placing a hefty piece of roast on his neighbor's plate. She cut off a small piece and placed the rest on her neighbor's plate, scraping it off the floor with her thumb. The piece went around like this until someone said they thought they'd keep it, that there was more where that had been, and a new piece began the round. While the midwife poured and served the tea, and the guest told him he was having a tough day, the midwife went around with sweet tea, strongly spiced with saffron and cinnamon, offering it to everyone and taking whoever loved him should just say so. He was there for everyone. And whoever said he was a lover, she poured tea into their wine, and she said she loved it too, that one could tolerate the wine much better, that it didn't give one a headache. They ate and drank, but scarcely had the noise subsided when always arises when one gives to new courts. Then everyone fell silent again, and their faces grew serious, and one could hardly see that all their thoughts were on the spider. Shyly and furtively eyes glanced up at the cork behind grandfather's back, and everyone hesitated to start talking about it again. Then the godmother cried out loudly and almost fell off her chair. A fly had run over the pine cone. It had thought that the spider's black legs were peeping out of the hole, and trembled all over with fright. It was scarcely laughed at. Its fright was a welcome occasion to start talking about the spider again. For once something has truly touched our soul, it doesn't get rid of it so easily. "But listen, cousin," said the older grandfather. "Hasn't the spider ever come out of its hole since then, but has stayed there for so many hundreds of years?" "Well," said the grandfather, "it would be better to keep quiet about the whole thing, since we've been talking about it all afternoon." "Well, mother," said the cousin, "let your old man talk. He made us live quite short, and nobody will hold it against you, since you're not descended from Christine, and you won't take our thoughts away from the matter. And if we're not allowed to talk about it, then we won't talk about anything else, and then there won't be any short time left. Now, grandfather, speak. Your old woman won't allow it. If you want to force it, then force it, for all I care." "But it would have been wiser to start with something else now, and especially now towards the night," said the grandmother. Then the grandfather began, and all faces relaxed. "What I know is not much anymore, but what I do know I want to say. Perhaps someone in this day and age could take an example from it. It certainly wouldn't hurt many people." When the people knew the spider was in prison and their lives were safe again, they felt as if they were in heaven and the good Lord with his blessedness was among them, and for a long time things went well. They clung to God and fled from the devil, and even the knights who had recently moved into the castle respected God's hand and treated the people gently, helping them up. But everyone regarded this house with reverence, almost like a church. At first, of course, they shuddered when they looked at it, saw the dungeon of the terrible spider, and thought how easily it could break free and the misery could begin anew with the devil's power. But they soon saw that God's power was stronger than that of the devil, and out of gratitude to the mother who had died for everyone, they helped the child and built the farmyard for them free of charge, until they could work it themselves. The knights wanted to allow them to build a new house, so that they wouldn't have to fear the spider or that it might accidentally escape from the inhabited house. And many neighbors wanted to help them who were afraid of the spider before the monster. before which they trembled so terribly, unable to escape. But the old grandmother would not do it. She taught her grandchildren, here be the spider is banished by God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, as long as these three holy names are valid in this house, as long as food and drink are consumed at this table in these three holy names, as long as they are safe from the spider and the spider is firmly in its hole and no accident may interfere with this matter. Here at this table with the spider behind them, they will never forget how much they need God and how powerful he is. Thus the spider reminds them of God, and despite the devil, must become their salvation. But if they were to turn away from God, even if in 100 hours away, the spider, the devil himself, could find them. The children understood this, stayed in the house, grew up fearing God, and the blessing of God was upon the house. The little boy who was so faithful to his mother, and so faithful his mother to him, grew up to be a handsome man, dear to God and man, and found favor with the knights. Therefore he was blessed with earthly goods, and never forgot God in them, never became stingy with them. He helped others in their distress, just as he wished to help in his final hour. And where he was too weak to help himself, he became all the more a powerful intercessor with God and man. He was blessed with a wise wife, and between them was an unfathomable peace. Therefore their children flourished devotedly, and both found a gentle death late in life. His family continued to flourish in the fear of God and do the right thing. Yes, God's blessings lay over the whole valley, and there was happiness in field and stable. And among the people, the terrible lesson was revealed to the people. Continuing, this is the last part of the spider. Their hearts were turned toward God. They held fast to him. Whatever they did in his name. And whenever one could help another, he did not delay. No evil came to them from the castle, only good. Fewer and fewer knights lived there, for the struggle in the heathen lands grew ever harder, and every hand that could fight was needed. But those who remained in the castle were reminded daily by the great hall of the dead, where the spider had shown its power upon knights as well as peasants. Excuse me, that God's strength falls equally upon anyone who turns away from him, whether peasant or knight. So many years passed in blessing and prosperity, and the valley became renewed above all others. Their houses were stately, their stores abundant. Many a coin rested in their chest. Their cattle were the finest in hill and valley. Their daughters famed far and wide, and their sons welcome everywhere. And this renown did not wither overnight, like Jonah's gourd, but endured from generation to generation. For the sons lived in the same fear of God and honesty as their fathers. But just as the warm bones, deepest in the pear tree, that has fed the richest sap, hollowing it, withering it, killing it, so it happens that where God's blessings flow most richly upon people, the worm creeps into the blessing, swelling them with pride and blinding them, so that in the midst of the blessing they forget God. In the midst of wealth they forget the one who gave it. They become like the Israelites, who, when God had helped them, forgot him before their golden calves. So after many generations had passed, pride and arrogance made their home in the valley, and foreign women brought and multiplied both. Their clothing grew more extravagant, jewels glittered everywhere, and pride even dared to lay hands upon holy things. Instead of their hearts being fervent in prayer, their eyes clung proudly to the golden beads of their rosaries. Their worship became display and vanity, while their hearts grew hard towards God and man. They cared nothing for God's commandments. They mocked his service and his servants. For where there is much pride or much money, there comes easily the delusion that one's own desires are wisdom, and that this wisdom stands higher than God's. As they had once been oppressed by the knights, so now they became harsh towards their servants and oppressed them. The less they worked themselves, the more they demanded of others, and the more they demanded, the more they treated their servants like mindless beasts, never thinking that these too had souls to be guarded. Where there is much money or much pride, building soon begins, each house grander than the last, and as the knights once built, so now they built. And as the knights once tormented them, so they spared neither servant nor cattle when the building fever seized them. This change had come upon this very house, though the old wealth remained. Nearly 200 years had passed since the spider had been sealed in the hole. Then a clever and strong-willed woman became mistress here. She was not from the Lindau line, yet she resembled Christine in many ways. She too was from elsewhere, given to pride and haughtiness, and she had only one son. Her husband had died under her rule. The boy was handsome, good-natured, and friendly to people and animals alike. She loved him dearly, but she never let him see it. She ruled his every step. Nothing he did was right unless she permitted it. Though he was long grown, he was not allowed to join his companions or attend a fair without his mother at his side. When she finally deemed him old enough, she gave him away from her own kin, one after her own mind. Now he had two masters instead of one, both equally proud and equally haughty. And because they were so, they insisted that Kristen must be so as well. And when he was gentle and humble, as suited him so well, he learned quickly who was master. For a long time, the old house had been a thorn in their eyes. They were ashamed of it, for the neighbors had new houses, though none were as wealthy as they. The tale of the spider and the grandmother's warning were still in everyone's memory. Otherwise, the old house would have been torn down long ago, but all resisted them. They took this resistance more and more as envy that begrudged them a new house. Besides, the old house grew ever more uncanny to them. When they sat at the table, it seemed as though a cat purred behind them, or as though the hole opened safely and the spider stretched towards their necks. They lacked the faith that had sealed the hole, and so they feared more and more that it might open. Thus, they found a fine excuse to build a new house, one in which they thought they would not need to fear the spider. Kristen was deeply unwilling. He remembered when the old grandmother had said and believed the family's blessing was bound to the family house. He did not fear the spider, and when he sat at the table here, it seemed to him he could pray with the grandest devotion. He said what he believed, but his woman bade him to be silent, and because he was their servant, he obeyed, though he often wept bitterly when they did not see. Above the tree where they sat, they planned to build a house such as none in the whole region possessed. In proud impatience, for they knew nothing of building and could not wait to show off their new house, they tormented servants and cattle alike. They spared not even the holy feast days, nor allowed rest at night. No neighbor came to help them freely, as was the custom could satisfy them, and if he went home to tend his own affairs, they wished him ill for it. When the frame was raised and the first peg drawn into the threshold, smoke rose from the hole like wet straw trying to burn. The workmen shook their heads and whispered that the new house would not grow old, but the woman laughed and ignored the sign. When the house was finished, they moved in, furnished it with unheard of splendor, and held a housewarming feast that lasted 3 days, one that children and grandchildren still spoke of throughout the Emmental. Yet, throughout these 3 days, a strange purring was heard in the house, like a cat, pleased to have its fur stroked, but no cat could be found, though they searched everywhere. Many guests grew uneasy and slipped away despite all the magnificence. Only the woman heard nothing or paid it no mind with the new house. They believed they had gained everything. Yes, the blind do not see the sun, and the deaf do not hear the thunder. So the woman rejoiced in their new house, grew prouder every day, thought nothing of the spider, and lived a life of idle luxury. Dressing and feasting, no one could please them, and they thought nothing of God. In the old house, the servants remained alone, living as they pleased. When Kristen wished to oversee them, the woman forbade it, the mother out of pride, the wife out of jealousy. So there was no order below, and soon no fear of God either. When there is no master, chaos follows. When no master sits at the table, no master holds the rein, indoors or out. Soon the one who behaves the worst thinks himself the greatest, and the one who speaks the most wickedly thinks himself the best. So when in the house below, the servants soon behaved like a pack of wild cats. They no longer prayed, had no respect for their God's will or his gifts. As the mistress's pride knew no bounds, so the servants' brutish arrogance knew no limits. They desecrated bread, flung porridge across the table, struck each other with spoons, and even fouled the food like beasts to spoil others' appetites. They mocked the neighbors, tormented the cattle, scorned every service of God, denied all higher authority, and plagued the priests who had rebuked them. They feared neither God nor man and grew wilder each day. The worst behavior came from the young men and maids, though they tormented each other as much as possible. When the young men could think of no new way to torment the maids, one of them had the idea to frighten them with the spider in the hole, or tame them with it. He flung spoonfuls of porridge or milk at the peg, and shouted that the creature inside must be hungry after so many hundreds of years without food. The maids screamed terribly and promised anything they could. Even the other young men shuddered, but when the game went unpunished and repeated, it lost its effect. The maids no longer screamed or promised anything, and the other young men began to join in. The one began striking at the hole with a knife, swearing dreadful oaths that he would He swore he would pry the peg loose and see what was inside, and that they all ought to see something new for once. This awakened fresh terror, and the fellow who did this became master over them all, able to force whatever he wished, especially upon the maids. He must have been a strange man indeed. No one knew where he came from. He could act gentle as a lamb or raging as a wolf. Alone with the woman he was meek and soft, but before the others he was like a ravening wolf, behaving as though he hated everyone and wished to outdo them all in wild deeds and words. Such men, they say, are often the ones women like best. So the maids shrank from him in public, yet when alone they favored him above all others. His eyes were mismatched, though no one knew their true colors. for each seemed to hate the other and never looked the same way. But beneath long lashes and a humble downward gaze, he knew how to hide it. His hair was beautifully curled, yet no one could say whether it was red or pale. In the shade it looked like the finest flax, but in the sun no squirrel had a redder coat. He tormented the cattle like no one else, and the beasts hated him for it. Each of the young men thought he was his friend, and he set them all against one another. The proud mistresses favored him alone. He alone was often in the upper house, and whenever he noticed the maids behaving wildly below, he would press his knife against the peg and begin his threats until the maids crawled to the cross. But even this game soon lost its power. The maids grew used to it and finally said, "Do it then if you dare, but you do not dare." Christmas approached the Holy Night. They gave no thought to what it signifies. They had resolved to spend it in riot and pleasure. Down in the castle lived only an old knight who cared little for earthly matters anymore. Hold on 1 second. A rogue of a steward managed everything for his own gain. By some trick, they had obtained from him noble Hungarian wine, from the very land where the knights were fighting their great battles. They knew nothing of the strength and fire of such wine. A terrible storm rose, lightning and wind such as seldom came at that season. One could not have driven a dog from under the stove. The storm did not keep them from church. They would not have gone in fair weather either, but would have let the master go alone, yet it kept others away, so they remained alone in the old house with the noble wine. They began the holy evening with cursing and dancing, with wild and wicked deeds. Then they sat to a meal the maids had prepared, boiled meat, white porridge, and whatever else they had stolen. Their coarseness grew ever more dreadful. They desecrated every dish, mocked all that was holy. The young men already mentioned mocked the priests, broke bread, and drank wine as though he were saying mass, baptized the dog under the stove, and carried on until the others, wicked as they were, grew frightened. Then he stabbed his knife into the hole and cursed that he would show them far worse things. When they refused to be frightened, for he had done the same thing many times, and since the knife could do little against the peg, he seized in half madness a drill. When with dreadful oaths he swore he would learn what he could do. He swore they would learn what he could do, that they would pay for their laughter, that their hair would stand on end, and he drove the drill wildly into the peg. With a loud cry they all rushed at him, but before anyone could stop him, he laughed like the devil himself, and gave the drill a mighty wrench. Then the whole house shook with a thunderclap. The evildoer fell backwards. A red stream of fire burst from the hole, and in its midst sat the spider, huge, black, swollen, with the poisonous sentries, staring with venomous delight at the sinners who, frozen in mortal terror, could not move a limb to escape the dreadful creature as it crept slowly and maliciously over their faces, injecting fiery death. A howl of agony rose through the house, such as 100 wolves could not utter even in their fiercest hunger. Soon a similar cry came from the new house. Kristen, who was just returning from the Holy Mass, thought robbers had broken in, and trusting his strong arm, he rushed to help his family. He found no robbers, only death. Wife and mother wrestled with it already, their faces swollen black, their voices gone. His children slept peacefully, their cheeks healthy and red. A terrible suspicion rose in Christian's heart. He rushed to the lower house. Then he saw all the servants dead, the room turned into a chamber of death, the dreadful hole open, the drill still in the hand of the horribly disfigured young man, and on the drill's end tip the terrible peg. Now he knew what had happened. He clasped his hand above his head, and had the earth swallowed him, he would have welcomed it. Then something crept out from behind the stove and pressed itself against him. He recoiled in terror, but it was not the spider. It was a poor little boy he had taken into the house for God's sake, leaving him among the wicked servants, as happens even now, when children are taken for God's sake and handed over to the devil's keeping. The child had taken no part in the servants' horrors. Frightened, he had fled behind the stove. He alone had been spared by the spider, and could now tell what had happened. But even as the boy spoke, cries of terror rose through wind and storm from other houses, and though in 100 years pent-up fury the spider flew through the valley, choosing first the most luxurious homes where God was least remembered, and the world most adored, and where death was least expected. Before daybreak the news had reached every house. The old spider had broken loose and was once more bringing death through the community. Many already lay dead. From the far end of the valley, scream after scream rose to heaven from the marked ones who must die. One can imagine the misery in the land, the fear in every heart, what kind of Christmas it was in Sumiswald. No one could think of the joy the day usually brings, and such misery came from human sin. The misery grew greater each day, for the spider was swifter and more venomous than before. Now she appeared at the front of the valley, now at the back, and on the mountains and in the valley. She showed herself at the same time. Once she marked one here and one there, now she seldom left the house before poisoning them all. Only when all writhed in death would she sit upon the threshold and stare maliciously into the dying, as though to say she was here again no matter how long they had imprisoned her. It seemed as though she knew her time was short, or wished to spare herself effort, for wherever she could she struck down many at once. Then she lurked especially for funeral processions. Here, there, most often at the church slope, she would appear suddenly in the midst of the mourners, or glare down from the coffin upon them. Then a terrible cry rose up to heaven. Man after man fell, until the whole procession lay along the road, wrestling with death, until no life remained among them, and around the coffin lay a heap of dead like brave warriors fallen around their banner. No more dead were carried to church. No one would hear them. No one accompanied them. Where death struck them, they were left. Despair lay over the whole valley. Rage boiled in every heart and poured out in dreadful curses against poor Kristen. Now he was to blame for everything. Suddenly everyone knew that Christian should never have left the old house, never have abandoned servants to themselves. Suddenly everyone knew that a master is more or less responsible for his household, that he must watch over prayer and meals, restrain godless living, godless speech, and godless misuse of God's gifts. Now pride and arrogance vanished from them all. They cast these sins into the lowest hell and could scarcely believe that they had worn them so shamelessly only days before. They were all pious again, wearing their poorest clothes, holding their old despised rosaries, persuading themselves they'd always been devout, and expecting God to believe it too. Christian alone among them all was to be godless, and curses like mountains fell upon him from every side, yet he was perhaps the best among them. But his will had been bound beneath the will of his woman, and such bondage is indeed a heavy guilt for any man, and he cannot escape the responsibility, for he is not as God intended him to be. Christian saw this too, therefore he was not defiant, did not protest, but made himself appear guiltier than he was. Yet this did not reconcile the people. Rather they cried all the louder that his guilt must be great, since he took so much upon himself and humbled himself so far, confessing he was worth nothing. But he prayed day and night that God would turn the evil. Yet it grew more terrible each day. He realized he must speak good what he had failed to do, that he must offer himself as a sacrifice, that upon him lay the deed his ancestors had. Suddenly everyone knew that Christian... Okay, wait. Hold on. Yet he was perhaps the best among... Okay, wait, we did that one. He prayed day and night that God would turn the evil, yet it grew more terrible each day. He realized he must make good what he failed to do, that he must offer himself as a sacrifice, that upon him lay the deed his ancestors had done. He prayed until a fire resolve rose in his heart, to save the valley, to atone for the evil, and with the resolve came steadfast courage, unwavering, ready for the same deed morning or evening. So he left the new house with his children and returned to the old one. He cut a new peg for the hole, had it blessed with holy water and sacred words, laid the hammer beside it, sat down by his children's bed, and waited for the spider. He sat, prayed, and kept watch, fighting heavy sleep with firm courage. But the spider did not come, though she was everywhere else, for the death toll grew greater and the rage of the survivors wilder. In the midst of this terror, a wild woman was about to give birth. The people feared the spider would seize the unbaptized child, the pledge of her ancient pact. The woman raged like one possessed, with no trust in God, only hatred and vengeance in her heart. They remembered how the elders once protected themselves from the green man when a child was to be born, how the priest was a shield placed between them and the eternal enemy. They wished to send for the priest, but who would go? The unburied dead, struck down during funeral processions, blocked the roads. Could any messenger escape the spider, who seemed to know everything? If he went to fetch the priest, all were afraid. At last the woman's husband thought if the spider wanted him, she could seize him at home as well as on the road. If death was appointed for him, he would not escape it here or there. He set out, but hour after hour passed and no messenger returned. Rage and despair grew more terrible. The birth drew near. Then the woman, in the frenzy of despair, tore herself from her bed and rushed towards Christian's house, the 1,000 times cursed house, when he sat praying beside his children, awaiting the struggle with the spider. Her screams echoed from afar. Her curses thundered at Kristen's door long before she burst it open, and brought the storm into his room. When she rushed in, her face so dreadful, he started up. For a moment he thought it was Christine in her original form, but at the threshold her pain halted her. She clung to the doorpost, pouring out a flood of curses upon poor Christian. He must be the messenger, she screamed, or be cursed with his children and his children's children forever. Then pain overcame her rage, and a son was born upon Christian's very threshold. All who had followed her fled in terror, expecting the worst. Christian held the tiny innocent in his arms. From the woman's distorted features, her eyes glared at him, sharp, wild, and venomous, and it seemed to him as though the spider itself looked out from them. Then a strength from God came into him, and a supernatural will grew mighty within him. He cast a tender glance at his children, wrapped the newborn in his warm cloak, leapt over the glaring woman, and ran down the mountain towards Sumiswald. He would carry the child himself to holy baptism to atone for the guilt that lay upon him as head of his household. The rest he left to God. The dead blocked his path. He had to place his steps carefully. Then a light foot overtook him, the poor little boy, who had fled the wild woman and followed his master out of childlike instinct. Sharp pain pierced Christian's heart at the thought of his own children left alone with the raging woman. But his feet did not stop. He strode towards the holy goal. He had reached the church slope and now the chapel when suddenly a glow flared between him and the path. Something stirred in the bushes. The spider sat in the road. In the bush a red plume wavered, and the spider rose high as if to spring. Then Christian cried aloud to the triune God. A wild scream sounded from the bush. The red plume vanished. He placed the child in the boy's arms, and commending the spirit to the Lord, seized the spider with his strong hand. She remained fixed to the spot, as though bound by the holy words. Fire steamed through his bones, but he held fast. The way was cleared. The boy, with understanding beyond his years, ran to the priest with the child. Christian, fire in his hand, ran like one winged back towards his house. Terrible was the brain in his hand. The spider's poison coursed through every limb. His blood turned to flame. His strength faltered. His breath failed. But he prayed without ceasing, held God before his eyes, and endured the hellish fire. He saw his house. With pain came hope. At the threshold stood the woman. Seeing him come without the child, she rushed at him like a tigress robbed of her young, believing the vilest betrayal. She heeded neither his gesture nor the words from his gasping chest. She hurled herself into his outstretched hands, clinging to him. In mortal anguish, he dragged the raging woman inside, fought to free his arm, and at last forced the spider into the hole, driving the pagan with dying hands. With God's help, he accomplished it. He cast a dying glance at his children. They smiled sweetly in their sleep. Then all became light to him. A higher hand seemed to quench his burning. Praying aloud, he closed his eyes in death. Peace and joy lay upon his face when the people came, fearful and trembling to see what had become of the woman. They found the hole sealed, but the woman lay scorched and twisted in death. From Christian's hand she had taken the fiery death. They still stood there, not understanding what had happened, and when the boy returned with the child, accompanied by a priest who had baptized the infant quickly according to the custom of the time, and had come prepared to face the same battle in which his predecessor had given his life. But God required no such sacrifice of him. The battle had already been fought by another. Long did the people fail to grasp the greatness of Christian's deed. When at last faith and understanding came to them, they prayed joyfully with the priest, thanked God for the new given life and for the strength he had granted Christian. They begged his forgiveness even in death and resolved to bury him with great honor. His memory shone in their souls like that of a saint. They scarcely knew how to feel when the terrible fear that had shaken their limbs for so long suddenly vanished, and they could look up again with joy into the blue sky, without dreading that the spider might be creeping over their feet. They resolved to have many masses said and to hold a general pilgrimage above all. They wished to bury the two bodies, Christian and the woman who had tormented him, and then as far as possible to give the others a resting place as well. It was a solemn day when the whole valley walked to the church, and in many hearts it was solemn indeed. Many sins were recognized, many vows were made, and from that day on, much of the exaggerated display in faces and clothing was no longer seen. After many tears had been shed in the church and churchyard, and many prayers offered, all who had come to the burial, and all who were able to walk had come, went to the customary meal at the inn. As usual, the women and children sat at their own table, while the grown men sat at the famous round table, which can still be seen at the Bear Inn at Sumiswald. It was preserved as a memorial that once only 24 men lived where now 2,000 dwell, a reminder that the lives of the 2,000 rest in the hand of him whom saved the 24. In those days they did not linger long at the grave. Their hearts were too full for much food or drink. As they left the village and came out into the open height, they saw a redness in the sky, and when they reached home they found the new house burned to the ground. How it happened was never known. But the people did not forget what Christian had done for them. They repaid it to his children. They raised them piously and honorably in the most devout households. No hand touched their property, though no accounts were shown. It was increased and well cared for, and when the children grew up, they were not only not robbed of their goods, but even less of their souls. They became upright, God-fearing people, who found grace with God and favor with men, who found blessing in life and even more in heaven. And so it remained in the family that they did not fear the spider, for they feared God, and as it had been so, God willing, it would remain as long as the house stood there, as long as children followed their parents in ways and thoughts. Here the grandfather fell silent, and all were silent for a long time. Some pondered what they had heard, others thought he was only catching his breath and would continue. At last the godfather said, I have often sat at that round table and heard of the death toll, and how the whole male population once fit around it. But how exactly everything happened no one could tell me. Some said this, some said others, but tell me, where did you learn all this? Ah, said the grandfather, it was handed down in our family from father to son. And when the memory of it faded among the other people in the valley, our people kept it very secretly and did not speak of it openly. Only within the family was it told, so that no member should forget what builds a house and what destroys one, what brings blessing and what drives blessing away. You can hear from my wife how unwilling she is that it be spoken of publicly, but it seems to me more necessary than ever to speak of it, to show how far pride and arrogance can lead. So I am no longer keeping it secret, and this is not the first time I have told it among good friends. I always think what kept our family in blessing for so many years will not harm others, and it is not right to make a secret of what brings happiness and God's favor. You are right, cousin, answered the godfather, but I must still ask, was the house you tore down 7 years ago the ancient one? I can hardly believe it. No, said the grandfather, the ancient house had become ruinous nearly 300 years ago, and the blessing of God in fields and meadows had long had no place in it. Yet the family would not leave it, and they dared not build a new one, for they had not forgotten what had happened to their earlier builders. So they were in great difficulty and finally asked a wise man who lived in Haselbach for advice. He told them they could indeed build a new house on the site of the old one, but nowhere else. And the two things must be preserved, the old beam in which the spider lay, and the old spirit that had once driven the spider into it. Then the one blessing would rest upon the new house. They built the new house and fitted into it with prayer and care the old beam, and the spider did not stir, nor did the spirit or the blessing change. But even that new house grew old and small, its wood worm-eaten and rotten. Only this post remained firm and hard as iron. My father should have rebuilt, but he put it off. The task came to me. After long hesitation, I dared it. I did as the early ones had done, fitted the old beam into the new house, and the spider did not stir. But I will confess, never in my life did I pray so fervently as when I held that fateful wood in my hands. My whole body burned. Involuntarily, I looked to see whether black spots were appearing on my skin. A mountain fell from my heart when everything was finally in its place. Then my conviction grew stronger still, that neither I nor my children's children have anything to fear from the spider, as long as we forgot. The grandfather fell silent again, and the shiver had not yet left their backs as they heard he had once held the wood in his hand. They wondered how it would be for them if they had to take it into their hands as well. At last the cousin said, it is only a pity that one cannot know what is such a thing as true. One can hardly believe everything, and yet something must be in it, or the old wood would not be there. Be it true or not, said the young godfather, one can learn much from it. And besides, it seems to me we have had little time. I feel as though I only just come after church. You should not say too much, said the grandmother, or my old man will begin another story. You should eat and drink now. It is a shame how no one is eating or drinking. Everything cannot be bad. We have all done what we could as well as we understood it. Now much was eaten and much was drank, and between it all many sensible words were exchanged, until the moon stood large and golden in the sky, and the stars stepped out of the chambers to remind the people that it was time to go to sleep in their little rooms. The people saw the mysterious reminders well enough, but they sat so closely together, and each felt something uncanny stirring beneath this breastcloth at the thought of going home. And though no one said it, no one wished to be the first to rise. At last the godmother stood up, and with a trembling heart prepared to leave, but she lacked no safe companions. And together the whole company left the hospital house with many thanks and good wishes, despite all pleas to individuals and the whole group, to stay longer, for it would not grow dark. Soon the house was quiet, and soon it was quiet within as well. Peacefully it lay there, clean and fair, shining in the moonlight along the valley. Carefully and kindly it sheltered good people in sweet slumber, those who sleep with the fear of God and a good conscience in their hearts, whom not the black spider, but only the friendly sun will awaken from the rest. For where such a spirit dwells, the spirit may not stir, neither by day nor by night, but what power it will have when that spirit changes, that knows he who knows all things, and who assigns to each his strength, to spiders as to men. Okay, so that was the last line. That was the Swiss Goth story. Oh my god. Swiss Goth story of The Great Black Spider by, I believe it's Jeremias Gotthelf. So I'm going to upload this to YouTube, and I'll put the trilogy on as well, so you guys can have part 1 and part 2, like as one book, and then the whole trilogy. The trilogies, the Great God Pan, the Willows, and this, because the three of them basically were considered like not necessarily like cosmic horror, but kind of like the beginnings of this genre, like of what we know as horror now. This trilogy is very famous and often cited as having influence on writers like Lovecraft. And Lovecraft, I do believe, said that M.R. James, Lord Dunsany, like his fantasy works more, and Algernon Blackwood had a big influence on him. In his writing, some Le Fanu, but mainly it was Lord Dunsany and the fantasy works he did, M.R. James and Algernon Blackwood. So, we had to do the cards real quick. My dog ate my Four of Swords card, so, oh my. I didn't realize she had it, but like, look what she did to it. It's like, oh no. So the dog ate my homework, the dog ate my tarot card. I have a Welsh Corgi named Lulu. She's a little brat. Spoiled brat, but a baby. I love her very much. She's a sweet baby. She has these dark eyes. I think I've showed her to you guys. Alright, let's pull these real quick. Let's see. Okay. You have Five of Swords. So, Five of Swords is like some type of like conflict, probably an internal conflict. Seven of Wands, this is like someone like standing their ground or maybe like conflicted with themselves about something. It's like they're fighting with themselves about something. They feel like they have to maintain a position, but they don't really want to continue to maintain it. Seven of Swords, so this is like, it could be like watching from shadows, but it's often it's like not feeling good enough. So maybe it's like they want to do something, but they feel like they're standing their ground. They feel like they're not good enough to like move towards something else. Yeah, the Four of Cups, they're in like an apathy state. And then Justice is upright though, so there's like some type of karma or some type of fated thing that's like going to be changing. And the Sun is reversed. So, because this is like blocked energy right now. So, but you know what? It seems like that kind of goes. It's like things go in cycles. So, I will put this on YouTube and then I'll put up the trilogy for you guys, the anthology. And I hope you enjoy it. Leave your requests in the comments.